The CEO buried in snow owed her life to the man she'd destroyed. Adam Blake never imagined that pulling a stranger from a wrecked SUV would unravel everything: his past, his future, and the conspiracy that nearly killed them both. What started as one desperate act of mercy became a collision of two shattered worlds: a single father with nothing left to lose, and a powerful woman running from enemies she never saw coming. This is their story. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The wind didn't howl that night. It screamed. Adam Blake had worked double shifts before, had walked home through worse weather than this, but tonight the cold seemed to have teeth. It bit through his worn jacket, clawed at his face, turned his breath into clouds of white that vanished the moment they left his lips. His boots crunched through 6 inches of fresh snow, each step an effort, each breath a small victory against the storm that wanted to bury everything in its path. It was nearly midnight. The factory town of Millridge had long since rolled up its streets, shuttered its windows, and retreated behind locked doors. Only fools and the desperate walked in weather like this. Adam supposed he qualified as both. His hands, raw and aching even inside his gloves, throbbed with the memory of 12 straight hours on the packaging line. His supervisor, a woman half his age with twice his enthusiasm for corporate efficiency, had kept them running until every last order was filled, as if Christmas bonuses depended on it. They didn't. Adam had learned that lesson 3 months ago when the pink slip arrived, polite and impersonal, thanking him for his service to Morgan Industries. Restructuring, they called it. Optimization. Fancy words for putting people out of work right before the holidays. But Adam had a daughter. Sophie was 8 years old, brilliant, stubborn, and the only thing in his life that made sense anymore. So he took what work he could find: temp agencies, overnight stocking, anything that paid enough to keep their small apartment warm and her lunchbox full. Pride was a luxury he'd surrendered somewhere between his wife's funeral and the stack of medical bills that still haunted his kitchen drawer. The road home cut through the Eastern Pass, a winding stretch where trees pressed close and the shoulder dropped away into darkness. In summer, it was almost pretty. In a blizzard, it was treacherous. Adam kept his head down, one foot in front of the other, counting streetlights like prayer beads. He almost missed it. The tire tracks carved deep into the snow, veering off the road at an angle that spoke of panic rather than intention. They disappeared over the embankment, black scars against white. Adam stopped. His first instinct was to keep walking. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't his problem. He wasn't a hero. He was just tired. But something made him step closer to the edge. Curiosity, conscience, the part of him that remembered who he used to be before life had beaten the optimism out of him. That's when he saw the SUV. It was expensive, the kind of vehicle that cost more than 3 years of his salary back when he had a salary. Black, sleek, now crumpled against a boulder 20 feet down the slope. Steam rose from the crushed hood, dissipating into the storm. The driver's side door hung open, its interior light flickering weakly. Jesus, Adam whispered. He should call 911. That was the smart thing to do. But his phone was dead. Had been since this morning when he forgot to charge it, and the nearest house was miles back. By the time help arrived, he didn't finish the thought. He was already moving. The descent was treacherous. Snow gave way beneath his boots, and twice he had to grab at exposed roots to keep from sliding. His breath came in ragged gasps, and the wind threatened to knock him sideways. But he kept going, driven by something older than reason. When he reached the wreck, his heart was hammering. The interior light revealed what he'd feared. A woman slumped against the steering wheel, motionless. Blood matted her dark hair, trickling from a gash at her temple. Her designer coat, some kind of cream-colored wool that probably cost a month's rent, was torn at the shoulder. "Hey!" Adam pulled the door wider, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. He reached in, pressed 2 fingers against her neck, and felt the flutter of a pulse. Weak, but there. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by a new kind of panic. She needed a hospital. She needed warmth. She needed help he wasn't qualified to give. But she needed to get out of this car first. Adam assessed the situation with the quick efficiency of someone who'd once done this for a living. Before the factory, before Sophie, before everything fell apart, he'd been a volunteer rescue technician with the county fire department. It felt like another lifetime, but the training was still there, buried under years of ordinary life. The steering wheel was pinning her left arm. The dashboard had buckled inward, trapping her legs. But the damage wasn't catastrophic, not yet. The real danger was the cold. In weather like this, hypothermia could kill faster than any injury. Okay, he muttered to himself. Okay, we can do this. He braced himself against the door frame and carefully worked her arm free from the steering wheel. She moaned softly, a good sign, unconscious but not comatose. Next came her legs, which required him to half crawl into the wreck, snow soaking through his jeans as he leveraged the dashboard away from her shins. Come on, come on! Finally, she was free. Adam hooked his arms under hers and pulled, dragging her out of the vehicle and into the snow. She was lighter than he expected, almost frail despite her height. Up close, he could see she was maybe 35, with sharp features and the kind of skin that spoke of expensive moisturizer and too little sleep. The wind immediately tried to steal her away. Adam shielded her with his body, making a split-second decision he knew was probably stupid, but felt inevitable. His cabin was half a mile up the road. Old, drafty, barely more than a hunting shack, but it had a fireplace and walls and a roof that mostly didn't leak. It was closer than anything else, and standing here debating wasn't going to save her life. He shifted her weight, pulling her across his shoulders in a fireman's carry. She was dead weight, her head lolling against his back, and every step sent jolts of pain through his already exhausted legs. But Adam had carried heavier burdens than this. He started walking. The world narrowed to a tunnel of white and gray. Snow everywhere, above and below and sideways, erasing landmarks and turning the familiar road into alien territory. Adam's lungs burned. His muscles screamed. The woman's blood soaked through his jacket, warm and then cold against his shoulder. He counted steps. 100, 200, lost track somewhere around 500, and just kept moving because stopping meant death for both of them. When the cabin finally materialized through the storm, a dark shape against darker trees, Adam nearly wept with relief. The door wasn't locked. It never was. There was nothing inside worth stealing. He kicked it open, stumbled through, and laid the woman as gently as he could on the ancient sofa that served as his bed when Sophie was away visiting her grandparents. The cabin was cold, almost as cold as outside. Adam's hand shook as he worked, from cold or adrenaline or both. First priority, heat. He lurched to the fireplace, where he always kept kindling ready, one of the small disciplines that kept chaos at bay. His fingers fumbled with matches, dropping two before finally coaxing a flame to life. The fire caught reluctantly, smoking before finding its rhythm, but it caught. Warmth began to seep into the space, pushing back the worst of the cold. Second priority, the woman. Adam knelt beside her, taking stock of injuries with hands that remembered this work, even if he'd rather forget. The head wound was the most obvious concern, deep enough to bleed freely, but not deep enough to be immediately fatal. Concussion, certainly. He needed to keep her warm, keep her still, watch for signs of brain trauma. He grabbed every blanket he owned, 3 in total, and piled them over her. Then he peeled off his soaked jacket and went to work cleaning the wound with bottled water and the first aid kit he kept under the sink. His hands were steadier now, moving with practiced efficiency. "You're going to be okay," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. "I've got you." It was almost 1 in the morning when her eyes finally flickered open. Adam had been feeding the fire, coaxing it higher, and he turned at the sound of her sharp intake of breath. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, disoriented, and then her gaze swung to him. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly confused. "Where?" Her voice was a rasp. "You're safe," Adam said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Your car went off the road. I found you. This is my cabin. You were unconscious, so I brought you here." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the cushions. "My head. You have a pretty bad cut, probably a concussion. You need to stay still." Her hand moved to her temple, fingers coming away red. She stared at the blood as if it belonged to someone else. I don't remember." "The crash?" Adam ventured. "That's normal. Head trauma can mess with memory." She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she'd passed out again. But then she spoke, each word careful and measured. I was driving. There was something wrong. The brakes, they didn't... She stopped, frowning. Why are you helping me? It was such a strange question that Adam actually laughed, a short, startled sound. Because you needed help. You don't know me. Doesn't matter. She studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if she was trying to solve an equation that didn't quite add up. What's your name? Adam Blake. Recognition flickered across her face, so quick he almost missed it, but it was there, unmistakable. Her expression shuddered immediately, becoming neutral. Do I know you? He asked. No? She said it too quickly. He didn't believe her, but pressing the issue seemed cruel when she'd just survived a car crash. Instead, he moved to the small kitchen, barely more than a hot plate and a mini fridge, and started heating water for tea. You should rest, he said over his shoulder. When the storm clears, I'll get you to a hospital. No. Adam turned. No? No hospital. Her jaw was set, stubborn despite the pallor of her skin. I can't. It's complicated. You might have a serious injury. I said no. The steel in her voice was unmistakable. This was someone used to being obeyed. Adam bit back a dozen arguments and focused on the tea. Earl Grey, the cheap kind from the discount store, but it was hot and caffeinated, and that had to count for something. He brought her a chipped mug, and she accepted it with hands that trembled slightly. She sipped, made a face, but kept drinking. Thank you, she said quietly. You're welcome. Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of wind outside. Adam found himself studying her, not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a severe sort of way, but because something about this whole situation felt wrong. The car was expensive. Her clothes were expensive. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege. But she'd been driving alone on a back road in the middle of a blizzard, and now she was refusing medical care. Are you in trouble? He asked bluntly. She looked at him sharply. Why would you ask that? Because people who crash their cars in storms usually want to call someone. Family, friends, insurance. You haven't asked to use a phone. You don't want to go to a hospital, and you got real quiet when I told you my name. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, so softly, he almost didn't hear it. Yes, I think I might be in serious trouble. Adam's stomach tightened. What kind of trouble? The kind where someone might have tried to kill me. The words hung in the air like smoke. Adam stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but her expression was grave. You think someone sabotaged your car? He said slowly. I don't think. I know. She set down the tea with a shaking hand. The brakes failed right before a turn. The steering locked up. That doesn't just happen to a vehicle that was serviced 3 days ago. Jesus. Adam ran a hand through his hair. Then you definitely need to call the police. No. Again, that finality. Not yet. Not until I know who I can trust. Lady, I don't know what kind of situation you're mixed up in, but Clara. What? My name. It's Clara Morgan. The name hit him like a physical blow. Clara Morgan, CEO of Morgan Industries. The woman whose signature had been on his termination letter. The woman whose company had gutted his town, closed the plant, and scattered 200 families like autumn leaves. Adam took a step back, his mind reeling. Of all the people to pull from a wreck, of all the lives to save. You, he said, and it came out harsher than he intended. You're the one who fired half the town. Claire's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Resignation, maybe? Or guilt. Yes, I am. And now you're in my cabin, bleeding on my couch, because someone tried to kill you. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's ironic. If you want me to leave, I didn't say that. Adam cut her off, surprised by his own words. I'm not going to throw you back into a blizzard. I'm not a monster. No, Clara said softly. You're not. They stared at each other across the small space, and Adam felt the weight of decisions he hadn't asked to make pressing down on him. He could help her, this woman who'd destroyed his livelihood. He could protect her, even though part of him wondered if justice might be better served by walking away. But he thought of Sophie, of the man he wanted her to see when she looked at her father. And he knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones, that he couldn't be anyone other than who he was, even if it cost him everything. "You can stay," he said finally, "until the storm passes. After that, we'll figure it out." Clara nodded, and something like relief flickered across her face. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. If someone really is trying to kill you, they might come looking." Adam moved to the window, peering out at the wall of white beyond. "And we're sitting ducks out here." "I doubt they'll expect me to be anywhere but a hospital or a morgue." "That's what you're counting on? Their assumption that you're dead?" "For now." Clara pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "Look, I know I'm asking a lot. If you want to wash your hands of this, I already said you can stay." Adam turned back to face her. "But tomorrow, when the roads are clear, you're going to tell me everything. Who's trying to kill you? Why? And what I'm getting myself into by helping." "Fair enough." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind continued its assault, but here, in this small shelter of stone and wood, something fragile had taken root. Trust, maybe. Or just the mutual recognition of two people caught in circumstances neither had chosen. Adam added another log to the fire and settled into the armchair across from the couch. He wouldn't sleep tonight. Couldn't. Not with an injured woman in his care and the possibility of danger lurking in the storm. But as the hours crawled toward dawn, as Clara's breathing evened out into something that might have been sleep, he found himself wondering how a single act of mercy could become so complicated, and whether he'd just saved a life or signed his own death warrant. The storm raged on through the night, but inside the cabin, warmth held steady. Adam kept vigil by the fire, feeding it logs every hour, watching Clara for signs of deterioration. Her sleep was restless, punctuated by small sounds of distress, but she didn't wake. Around 4 in the morning, Adam finally let himself doze, chin dropping to his chest, exhaustion winning the battle against worry. He woke to silence. The wind had stopped. Pale winter light filtered through the cabin's single window, and the fire had burned down to embers. Adam jerked upright, momentarily disoriented, and his eyes went immediately to the couch. It was empty. Panic seized him. He was on his feet before conscious thought caught up, scanning the small space. The blankets were folded neatly at the foot of the couch. Clara's torn coat was gone, and on the kitchen table, next to his dead phone, sat a woman's wristwatch. Expensive, broken, the crystal cracked across its face. No note, no explanation. Just the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air, and the ghost of a presence that had already slipped away into the morning light. Adam picked up the watch, turning it over in his hands. On the back, engraved in elegant script, CM. Time is the coin of your life. Spend it well. He stood there for a long time, holding that broken watch, staring at the empty space where a woman named Clara Morgan had spent the night fighting for her life. And he wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing, but the bloodstain on the couch cushion said otherwise. The empty first aid kit said otherwise. The tracks in the fresh snow leading away from his cabin said otherwise. She'd been here. He'd saved her. And now she was gone, vanished like smoke, leaving behind nothing but questions and a broken piece of time. Adam set the watch down carefully and moved to the window. The morning was crystalline, the kind of beautiful that only came after storms. Snow blanketed everything, pristine and perfect, erasing all evidence of last night's violence. Somewhere out there, a woman was running from people who wanted her dead. And somewhere deeper inside himself than he'd care to admit, Adam Blake knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. He'd spent years trying to be invisible, to keep his head down and survive each day without drawing attention or trouble. But in pulling Clara Morgan from that wreck and bringing her into his small sanctuary, he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The world had noticed him again. And this time, he had a feeling it wasn't going to look away. 2 days passed in a fog of routine and unease. Adam went through the motions, walked Sophie to school, picked up a shift at the warehouse, microwaved dinners neither of them had the energy to appreciate. But his mind kept circling back to that night. The blood on his couch, the broken watch on his table. The way Clara Morgan had looked at him when he'd told her his name, like she was calculating the weight of her debt. He'd scrubbed the bloodstain until his knuckles were raw, but a shadow of it remained, a ghost pressed into the fabric. The watch sat in his kitchen drawer now, wrapped in a clean dishcloth, though he wasn't sure why he'd kept it. Evidence, maybe, or proof that he hadn't imagined the whole impossible night. Sophie had noticed something was off. She'd asked him 3 times at breakfast if he was okay, her 8-year-old face scrunched with concern that made his chest ache. He'd lied, said he was fine, just tired from work. She hadn't believed him. She was too smart for that. But she'd let it go because that's what they did. They let things go because survival didn't leave room for all the questions that mattered. It was Thursday afternoon when everything changed again. Adam had just gotten home from dropping Sophie at her friend's house for a sleepover when he heard the car pull up outside. Not just any car, something expensive, the engine purring rather than rumbling. Through the window, he watched a sleek black sedan park in front of his cabin, completely out of place against the shabby surroundings. His first instinct was to lock the door. His second was to check for a weapon, though the best he could manage was the tire iron he kept by the coat rack. But then the driver's door opened and Clara Morgan stepped out. She looked different in daylight, put together in a way she hadn't been when bleeding and broken on his couch. Dark slacks, a camel-colored coat that looked warm and expensive. Her hair pulled back in a way that was both elegant and severe. But there were shadows under her eyes, and when she moved toward the cabin, he saw her favor her left side slightly. Adam opened the door before she could knock. They stared at each other for a long moment, and he watched something complicated move across her face. Relief, maybe, or apprehension. "You left," he said finally. It came out harder than he'd intended, accusatory. "I know." Her voice was quiet. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to complicate your life more than I already had." Little late for that. He stepped back, leaving the door open. "You might as well come in." Clara hesitated on the threshold, and in that pause, Adam saw something he hadn't noticed before. Uncertainty. This woman who'd built an empire, who'd fired hundreds with the stroke of a pen, was nervous about entering his tiny cabin. She stepped inside. The space felt even smaller with her in it, as if her presence demanded more room than the walls could provide. She stood in the center of the floor, looking around with an expression Adam couldn't quite read, taking inventory maybe of how the other half lived. "Coffee?" he offered, more out of habit than hospitality. "Please." He moved to the kitchen, grateful for something to do with his hands. The coffee maker was older than Sophie, prone to sputtering and occasionally giving up mid-brew, but today it cooperated. He poured 2 cups, black because he was out of milk and sugar seemed presumptuous. Clara accepted hers with both hands, like she needed the warmth. She sipped, and if she noticed it was terrible, she didn't say so. "Why are you here?" Adam asked. "You saved my life." She said it simply, stating a fact. "And I left without even thanking you properly." "You left a watch." "That was supposed to be—" She paused, seeming to reconsider her words. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought it might compensate for your trouble." "A broken watch compensates for harboring a fugitive?" "I'm not a fugitive. You're running from someone who wants you dead. Semantics." Adam set his coffee down harder than necessary. "Look, I don't need compensation. I did what anyone would do. But I do need to know if whoever's after you is going to show up at my door looking for answers." Clara's jaw tightened. "No one knows I was here. I was careful. People with money to hire assassins are usually good at finding what they're looking for." "He's not an assassin." The correction was sharp, defensive. "He's a board member, Marcus Webb, and he wants me gone, but he's not stupid enough to pull a trigger himself. Just stupid enough to tamper with your brakes. Smart enough, actually. It would have looked like an accident, icy roads, winter storm, tragic death of an overworked executive. The press would have loved it." The bitterness in her voice surprised him. Adam pulled out a chair and sat, studying her. "So why come back here? If you're so careful, why risk being seen at the cabin of some guy you met once?" Clara set down her coffee and met his eyes directly. "Because I saw the photos on your wall. The little girl, your daughter." Adam's stomach clenched. "Leave her out of this." "I'm not threatening her. I'm trying to explain." Clara moved to the wall where he'd hung a dozen snapshots of Sophie, school photos, birthday parties, that one perfect day at the beach before everything fell apart. I saw these, and I saw how you live, what you've sacrificed, and I realized that you're the kind of man who helps strangers in blizzards even when those strangers ruined your life. You don't know anything about my life. I know more than you think. She turned back to him. Adam Blake, 37 years old, employed at Morgan Industries for 8 years until the restructuring. Widower, single father. Currently working 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet because I decided your position was redundant. The words landed like blows. Adam stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Get out. Wait, I said get out. You want to feel guilty? Fine. Feel guilty somewhere else. Don't come into my home and itemize my failures like you're reading a quarterly report. That's not what I'm doing. Claire's voice rose to match his. I'm trying to tell you that I understand what I took from you, that I came here because I need to make it right. You can't make this right. You can't give me back my job or my dignity or the last 3 months of struggling to explain to my 8-year-old daughter why we can't afford new shoes. Adam's hands were shaking. You can't fix any of that with guilt or money or whatever else you're selling. I'm not selling anything. Claire's composure cracked, just slightly. I'm asking for your help. The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Adam laughed, but it was a hollow sound. My help? You've got to be kidding. I wish I was. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a slim folder, setting it on the table. This is everything I've been able to gather about Marcus Webb. Financial records, emails, patterns I've noticed in board meetings. It's not enough to go to the police with, not yet. But it's a start. Adam stared at the folder like it might bite. Why show me this? Because I can't trust anyone in my world. My assistant could be bought. My lawyers could be compromised. The people I thought were friends. She trailed off, shaking her head. But you? You have no reason to help me. No incentive beyond basic human decency, which means if you do help, it's real. You're insane. Probably. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. But I'm also right. You pulled me out of that car when you could have kept walking. You stayed up all night keeping me alive when you had every reason to let the cold take me. That says something about who you are. It says I'm an idiot with a savior complex. It says you're a good man in a world that doesn't have enough of them. Adam wanted to argue, to throw her words back in her face and watch her drive away in her expensive car. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the desperation he heard beneath her controlled tone. Maybe it was the memory of her blood on his jacket. Or maybe it was just that he'd spent so long being invisible, being dismissed, that having someone actually see him, really see him, was harder to reject than he'd expected. He sat back down heavily. Tell me about Webb. Relief washed over Claire's features. She pulled out the chair across from him and opened the folder, spreading papers across the table. Marcus Webb has been on our board for 6 years, came up through venture capital, made his fortune in tech acquisitions. He's smart, ruthless, and he's been positioning himself to take over the company since the day he arrived. And you're in his way. I'm more than in his way. I'm actively trying to restructure how we do business. Morgan Industries was my father's company, and when he died, I inherited a machine built on efficiency at the expense of humanity. She met Adam's eyes. The restructuring that cost you your job, that was Webb's plan. I fought it. I lost. Adam felt something shift in his chest, a small crack in the wall of resentment he'd built. You fought it? For 8 months. But he had the votes, and I had principles that don't matter much in a boardroom. Claire's smile was bitter. Compromise was firing half the workforce instead of closing the plan entirely. He wanted to move operations overseas. I kept it local, at least. Lucky us. I know it doesn't feel that way. I know you lost something that mattered, and nothing I say changes that. She gestured to the papers. But if Webb takes over, he'll finish the job. Every plant in every town like Millridge will close. Hundreds more families will be where you are now. So this isn't just about saving your own skin. Oh, it's absolutely about saving my skin. I don't have delusions of being noble. Claire's honesty was almost refreshing. But it happens that my survival aligns with preventing something worse. Call it enlightened self-interest. Adam picked up one of the papers, a spreadsheet dense with numbers. What am I looking at? Offshore accounts. Webb's been siphoning money from company projects for 2 years, funneling it through subsidiaries that technically exist but don't actually produce anything. He's building a war chest. For what? A hostile takeover. If I die or resign, he needs capital to buy out the other shareholders before they can install someone else. Right now I hold 35% of the company. He has 18. The rest is scattered among smaller investors who'll sell to whoever offers the most. And if he succeeds, then everything changes. He dismantles what's left of my father's vision, sells off the valuable pieces, and walks away with billions while communities like yours become ghost towns. Clara's voice was steady, but Adam heard the anger underneath. He's already started. That crash wasn't his first attempt. 3 weeks ago, someone broke into my home. 2 weeks ago, my assistant found a death threat in her email meant for me. The breaks were just the latest escalation. Adam set down the paper and rubbed his face. This was insane. He should tell her to take her folder and her problems and leave him out of it. He had Sophie to think about, a life to protect even if it was small and fragile. But he thought about the town, about the families he'd known for years now scattered to neighboring cities looking for work. He thought about the for sale signs multiplying like weeds. He thought about the fact that men like Marcus Webb moved through the world breaking things and never paid for it because people like Adam were too tired, too scared, or too busy surviving to stop them. What do you need from me? He heard himself ask. Clara's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to agree. Information. Webb doesn't know you exist, which means you can move in spaces I can't. He has an office downtown, a private club he frequents. If we can get access to his files, his communications, we might find something concrete enough to involve the authorities. You want me to spy on a billionaire? I want you to help me gather evidence against a man who's trying to kill me and destroy what's left of this town's economy. She paused. I know it's dangerous. I know it's asking too much. But I'll pay you. Enough to cover your expenses and then some. Enough that Sophie can have those new shoes. The mention of his daughter's name should have made him angry again. Instead, it crystallized something. This wasn't just about justice or revenge or even survival. It was about the kind of world he wanted Sophie to inherit, one where powerful men could attempt murder and get away with it, or one where someone, somewhere, stood up and said no. I don't want your money, Adam said quietly. Adam, but I'll help you. He held up a hand before she could speak. Not for payment. Not because I forgive what happened, but because if everything you're saying is true, then doing nothing makes me complicit. And I can't live with that. Something like respect flickered across Clara's face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I haven't done anything except agree to probably get myself killed. That's more than anyone else has offered. She gathered the papers back into the folder and slid it across the table. Study these. Get familiar with Webb's patterns. I'll set up a secure way for us to communicate. Nothing traceable. And Adam? She waited until he met her eyes. If at any point this becomes too much, if Sophie's safety is compromised in any way, you walk away. No questions, no guilt. Understood? It was strange hearing her talk about his daughter with that kind of careful concern, like she understood that Sophie was the only thing that mattered, the only line that couldn't be crossed. Understood, he said. Clara stood, buttoning her coat. At the door, she paused and turned back. That night in the storm, you asked me why I was driving alone on a back road. Yeah. I was coming to Millridge to see what I'd done, to walk through the town and understand the cost of my decisions. Her voice was soft. Guilt's a strange thing. It'll drive you out into a blizzard even when you know you should stay home. Did it help, seeing it? No. She smiled sadly. But meeting you did. And then she was gone, leaving Adam alone with a folder full of secrets and the distinct feeling that he'd just stepped off a cliff with no idea how far the fall would be. He spent that evening going through the papers, memorizing names and numbers and patterns that painted a picture of systematic corruption. Webb's fingerprints were everywhere once you knew where to look. Shell companies, falsified reports, board meetings where votes had been bought rather than earned. When Sophie came home the next morning, full of stories about her sleepover, Adam hugged her tighter than usual. "Dad, you're squishing me," she laughed. "Sorry, kiddo, just missed you." She pulled back, studying him with those two perceptive eyes. "You're being weird again." "Just weird regular amounts," he assured her. "Come on, let's make pancakes." They cooked together, flour dusting the counter and Sophie's chatter filling the small space with normalcy. But in the back of Adam's mind, wheels were turning. He was thinking about a man named Marcus Webb who thought he could buy the world, about a woman named Clara Morgan who'd looked at him like he was worth something beyond his labor, and about the choice he'd made to step into someone else's war, armed with nothing but stubborn decency and a folder full of someone else's crimes. 3 days later, Clara sent him a phone. It arrived in a plain package left on his doorstep, no return address, containing a cheap prepaid cell and a note written in neat handwriting. For secure communication. Memorize this number, then destroy this note. Adam did as instructed, burning the paper in the fireplace and watching the words curl into ash. That night, after Sophie was asleep, the phone buzzed with a text from an unlisted number. "Webb is hosting a charity gala next Friday. Black tie. Invitation only. I can get you in as my +1 if you're willing." Adam stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I don't own a tux." The response came quickly. "That can be arranged. Are you in?" He thought about saying no, about deleting the message and going back to his life of quiet desperation. But Sophie's shoes had holes in them. The town was dying. And somewhere out there, Marcus Webb was planning his next move, confident that no one would stop him. "I'm in," Adam typed. The reply was almost immediate. "Good. I'll send details tomorrow." "And Adam, thank you for this." He set the phone down and stared at the ceiling of his cabin, listening to the familiar sounds of Sophie's breathing in the next room and the wind moving through the trees outside. The world felt balanced on a knife's edge, about to tip one way or another, and he'd just thrown his weight onto the scale. There was no going back now. The week passed in a strange blur of ordinary life, shot through with extraordinary preparation. Clara had arranged for a tuxedo to be delivered, tailored, expensive, so far outside Adam's normal existence that wearing it felt like playing dress-up. She'd also sent files on the other guests expected at the gala, a who's who of wealth and influence that made Adam's head spin. "You'll fit in," Clara had told him during one of their brief phone calls. "Just follow my lead and let people assume you belong. That's half the battle." And the other half? Getting close enough to Webb to plant a listening device in his office. Adam had nearly dropped the phone. "You want me to bug his office? During a party?" "During the party is the safest time. Everyone will be distracted, security will be focused on the guests, and Webb will be playing host. His office is on the 3rd floor, last door on the left. I'll create a distraction. You'll have maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes to commit a felony. 5 minutes to gather evidence of multiple felonies. There's a difference." Now standing in his bathroom, adjusting a bow tie, he had no idea how to tie properly. Adam wondered if that difference would matter to a judge. But it was too late for second thoughts. Sophie was at her grandparents' for the weekend, safe and unaware of what her father was walking into. The tux fit like it had been made for him, which it had. And in his pocket was a device Clara had described as surveillance equipment that doesn't technically exist. A car arrived at 7. Not Clara, but a driver who barely looked at Adam before opening the rear door. The ride into the city was silent, the landscape changing from rural decay to urban renewal, from the world Adam knew to one he'd only ever seen in magazines. The gala was being held at the Grandview Hotel, a building that dripped with old money and new renovations. Adam had driven past it a dozen times, but never imagined stepping inside. Now, walking through doors held open by uniformed attendants, he felt like an imposter at someone else's life. Clara was waiting in the lobby. She wore a dress the color of midnight, elegant and understated in a way that somehow made her more noticeable rather than less. Her hair was down, softening features that were usually severe, and when she saw Adam, she smiled with what might have been genuine warmth. "You clean up well," she said, adjusting his crooked bow tie with practiced efficiency. "Feel like I'm wearing a costume." "Everyone here is wearing a costume. You'll fit right in." She took his arm, and they moved toward the ballroom. "Remember, you're Adam Blake. Independent consultant. We met through mutual colleagues. Keep it vague if anyone asks. And if they ask what I consult on? Risk assessment. It's boring enough that no one will dig deeper. The ballroom was excessive in the way only wealth could achieve. Crystal chandeliers, tables draped in white linen, centerpieces that probably cost more than Adam's monthly rent. People moved in clusters, talking and laughing with the ease of those who'd never worried about keeping the lights on. Adam felt Clara's hand tighten on his arm. There, she said quietly. By the bar. That's Marcus Webb. Adam followed her gaze to a man in his 50s, silver hair immaculately styled, holding court with a group of admirers. He was handsome in that polished way of someone who'd had professional help, and when he laughed, it was the kind of sound that demanded attention. He looks like a politician, Adam murmured. Worse. He's a predator who learned to smile for cameras. Clara steered them toward the opposite side of the room. We'll make the rounds first. Let him see us together. Let him wonder. Then, when dinner starts, I'll approach him. That's when you make your move. The next hour was surreal. Adam shook hands with people whose names he recognized from Forbes, made small talk about markets and trends he barely understood, and watched Clara work the room with the kind of grace that came from years of practice. She was good at this. The performance of interest, the careful navigation of egos and alliances. But he also saw the strain in her eyes, the way her smile never quite reached them. She was playing a part, just like him, except her costume had been sewn on years ago and she'd forgotten how to take it off. Dinner was announced, and people began finding their seats. Clara's hand brushed his arm. Now, she whispered. She moved toward Webb, and Adam watched her approach with his heart hammering. Webb's face lit up when he saw her, all false warmth and practiced charm. Clara said something that made him laugh, then gestured toward the terrace. They moved in that direction, drawing several other board members with them. Adam slipped away. The mansion's third floor was accessed through a side staircase marked private. Adam climbed quickly, trying to look like he belonged, praying no one would stop him. The hallway at the top was empty, lined with closed doors and artwork that was probably priceless. Last door on the left. It was unlocked, either carelessness or arrogance. Adam stepped inside and closed the door behind him, his pulse thundering in his ears. Webb's office was exactly what he'd expected. Massive desk, leather chairs, wall of windows overlooking the city. But it was the computer that mattered. Clara had been clear. Plant the device behind the monitor where it wouldn't be easily spotted and let it do its work. Adam moved to the desk, his hand surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. The device was small, barely larger than a USB drive with an adhesive backing. He peeled off the protective strip and pressed it against the back of the monitor where shadows would hide it. 5 seconds. 10. The door opened. Adam's heart stopped. A woman stood in the doorway, young, professionally dressed, her expression shifting from surprise to suspicion. Who are you? This floor is restricted. His mind raced. I got lost looking for the restroom. Someone downstairs pointed me up here. She didn't buy it. He could see her reaching for the phone clipped to her belt, probably calling security. Wait, Adam said, and something in his voice made her pause. Please. I'm not here to steal anything. I just needed a moment alone. The crowds... I have anxiety. I just needed to breathe. It was a terrible lie, transparent and desperate. But maybe that's what made it work. The woman's expression softened slightly. There are private lounges on the second floor, she said, her tone less accusatory. This area is for staff only. I understand. I'm sorry. Adam moved toward the door, careful not to rush, his entire being focused on getting out without escalating the situation. The woman stepped aside, and he slipped past her into the hallway. She watched him descend the stairs, and Adam felt her eyes on his back like a target. But she didn't call out, didn't sound an alarm. He made it back to the ballroom with his lungs burning and his hands shaking. Clara found him moments later, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes sharp with question. Done? Done, he confirmed quietly. Almost got caught. But you didn't. She squeezed his hand briefly. That's what matters. Let's get out of here. They made their excuses, thanked the hosts with the appropriate amount of enthusiasm, and left before dessert was served. The car was waiting, and neither of them spoke until they were miles from the Grandview, the city lights fading behind them. "You did well," Clara said finally. "I almost blew it." "Almost doesn't count." She turned to look at him in the dim light of the car. "The device is in place. Starting tomorrow, we'll have access to everything that happens on Webb's computer. Every email, every file, every search. If there's evidence, we'll find it." Adam leaned his head back against the seat, exhaustion crashing over him now that the adrenaline was fading. "How do you live like this? The constant performance, the pretending? You get used to it, or you forget there was ever any other way." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for tonight. I know what I'm asking of you isn't fair." "Nothing about this is fair, but it's necessary." He looked at her. "What happens when we find the evidence? When we have enough to prove Webb tried to kill you? Then we take it to the FBI. Financial crimes, attempted murder, that's federal territory. They'll have to act. And if they don't?" Clara's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Then I'll make sure the press gets every sordid detail. Webb's built his reputation on being respectable. Let's see how long that lasts when people know what he really is." The car dropped Adam back at his cabin just after midnight. He stood in the doorway for a long time after it drove away, still wearing the tuxedo, feeling like he'd returned from a different planet. Inside, he carefully hung up the borrowed clothes and changed back into his own. Jeans, flannel, the armor of ordinary life. But something had shifted. He'd walked into that hotel as a man with nothing to lose, and he'd walked out as someone who'd taken a stand, however small, against the machinery that crushed people like him without thought. It felt like stepping into his own skin for the first time in months. The burner phone buzzed. "Sleep well. Tomorrow, the real work begins." Adam smiled despite himself and typed back, "Never was good at easy." The response came immediately. "Good. Neither am I." He set the phone down and climbed into bed, but sleep was a long time coming. His mind kept replaying the night. Webb's practiced smile, the woman in the hallway, Clara's hand steady on his arm, the weight of the choice he'd made and couldn't unmake. Somewhere in the city, data was flowing from a tiny device to servers Clara controlled. Secrets were being exposed. And Marcus Webb had no idea that the man whose life he'd helped destroy was now the architect of his downfall. Justice, Adam thought, had a strange way of coming around. Sometimes it needed a push. Sometimes it needed someone foolish or desperate or angry enough to stand in its way and refuse to move. He'd become that someone. And though he didn't know yet what it would cost him, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd do it again. Because some debts couldn't be paid with money. Some required courage instead. The data started flowing in 3 days later. Adam was at the warehouse, stacking boxes that all felt like they weighed the same as his mounting anxiety when the burner phone vibrated in his pocket. He waited until his break, stepping out into the cold March air before checking the message. "We have something. Can you meet tonight?" Same place as before. The same place was a coffee shop on the edge of town, the kind that stayed open late and asked no questions about customers who nursed single cups for hours. Adam had been there twice since the gala, both times after dark, both times feeling like a character in someone else's thriller. He texted back his confirmation and spent the rest of his shift moving through a fog of anticipation and dread. Whatever Clara had found, it was significant enough to risk another meeting. That meant they were getting close. That meant danger was getting close too. Sophie was spending the evening with her friend Emma again, a regular arrangement that Adam was grateful for, even as it made him feel guilty. His daughter deserved a father who was present, not one chasing shadows in coffee shops. But he kept reminding himself why he was doing this, not just for Clara, not even for justice, but for the chance that Sophie might grow up in a world where people like Marcus Webb couldn't destroy lives without consequence. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Adam arrived at 8. Clara sat in the back corner booth, laptop open in front of her, 2 cups already on the table. She dressed down for this meeting, jeans, a simple sweater, her hair in a ponytail that made her look younger than her years. "You look tired," she said as he slid into the seat across from her. "I am tired. Haven't been sleeping great." Adam wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, grateful for the warmth. You said you found something? Clara turned the laptop so he could see the screen. It was filled with financial records, columns of numbers that meant nothing to him at first glance. But she began walking him through it, her finger tracing connections that slowly formed a picture. Webb's been moving money through 6 different shell companies, she explained, her voice low, even though no one was close enough to hear. Each one is registered in a different state, technically legal, but the pattern is clear. He's been siphoning funds from Morgan Industries for at least 3 years, maybe longer. How much are we talking about? Conservatively, $40 million. Adam felt the number land like a physical blow. Jesus Christ. And that's just what I can track. There could be more in offshore accounts we haven't accessed yet. Clara pulled up another document. But here's where it gets interesting. 2 weeks before my accident, Webb made a withdrawal of $500,000 in cash. No documentation, no paper trail beyond the withdrawal itself. Payment for the person who tampered with your car. That's my guess. But I need more than a guess. I need proof of the connection. She switched to an email thread, dates and names swimming before Adam's eyes. The device you planted has been recording everything. Emails, searches, even his video calls. Most of it is ordinary business, boring stuff. But 3 days ago, he had a call with someone whose number isn't in any of our databases. Could be personal. Could be. Except the call lasted 90 seconds, and immediately after it ended, Webb deleted his browser history and ran a security sweep on his computer. Clara's eyes were bright with the thrill of the hunt. People don't do that after calling their dentist. Adam studied the screen, trying to see what she saw. So what's the next move? I need to identify who he called. The number traces to a burner phone, no registered owner, but there are ways to triangulate location data if I can access the right systems. She paused, and he saw something flicker across her face. Hesitation. The problem is that requires resources I don't currently have access to. Police resources. You want to bring in the cops? Not yet. Not officially. Clara closed the laptop and met his eyes directly. But I have a contact. Former FBI, now works private security. He owes me a favor, and more importantly, he's someone I trust. If I bring him this data, he can help us track down Webb's mystery caller. And if this contact decides to go official, report everything to his former employers, he won't. Not without my permission. She said it with such certainty that Adam almost believed her. But I wanted to tell you before I made the call, you're in this as deep as I am now. You deserve to know every move before it happens. It was a small thing, that consideration, but it mattered more than Clara probably realized. Adam had spent most of his adult life being told what to do, when to do it, with no say in the decisions that shaped his existence. Having someone ask rather than command was almost foreign. Make the call, he said. Relief crossed Clara's face. Thank you. I'll set up a meeting for tomorrow. Can you? I'll be there. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were building pressing down on both of them. Around them, the coffee shop hummed with its own quiet life, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of a couple 2 tables over, the scratch of a student's pen on paper. Normal sounds from a normal world that felt increasingly distant. Can I ask you something? Adam said finally. Of course. Why are you really doing this? And don't say it's just about survival or stopping Webb. There's something else. Clara looked down at her coffee, and for a long moment Adam thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it before. My father built Morgan Industries from nothing. He was ruthless sometimes, made decisions I didn't agree with, but he believed that business could be a force for good if you tried hard enough. When he died, I inherited not just a company, but a philosophy. She looked up, and her eyes were shadowed with something that might have been grief. I've spent 5 years trying to honor that, trying to prove that you can be profitable and ethical at the same time. And then people like Webb come along and remind me that maybe my father was wrong. Maybe the only way to survive in this world is to be as brutal as your enemies. You don't believe that? Some days I do. Some days I think I'm just naive, playing a game I was never meant to win. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. But then I remember that night in the storm, how you pulled me out of that car when you had every reason to leave me there. And I think maybe my father wasn't completely wrong. Maybe there are still people who choose to be decent even when it costs them. The honesty of it disarmed him. Adam had spent weeks seeing Clara as an abstract figure, the CEO who'd ruined his life, the woman in danger, the unlikely ally. But sitting across from her now, seeing the exhaustion and determination and doubt that she usually kept hidden, he realized she was just as lost as he was, just trying to do the right thing in a world that didn't make it easy. Your father would be proud of you, Adam said quietly, for fighting back, for not letting Webb win. I hope so. Clara finished her coffee and stood. I'll text you the details for tomorrow's meeting. And Adam, be careful going home. Webb's people could be watching either of us. You think he suspects? I think he's paranoid and smart, which is a dangerous combination. Just be aware of your surroundings. She left first, a practiced precaution they'd developed. Adam waited 10 minutes before following, scanning the street for cars that didn't belong or faces that appeared too often. He saw nothing, but that didn't mean nothing was there. The drive home took him through the heart of Millridge, past the closed factory that had once been the town's beating heart. Even in darkness, it was a monument to loss, windows boarded up, parking lot empty. How many lives had been upended when those doors closed for the last time? How many families had scattered like his, looking for work that paid half as much and mattered less? Marcus Webb had done this, not alone, but he'd been the driving force, the voice arguing for efficiency over humanity. And now he was trying to finish the job, to squeeze the last drops of value from communities that had given everything. Adam felt anger rise in his chest, hot and righteous. He'd spent months swallowing that anger, turning it inward, letting it eat at him in the dark hours when Sophie was asleep and he was alone with his failures. But now it had somewhere to go. Now it had a target. He parked outside his cabin and sat for a moment in the darkness, letting his breathing steady. Tomorrow he'd meet Clara's contact, would take another step down this path he couldn't reverse. Tonight he'd check on Sophie, maybe read her a story if she wasn't already asleep, and pretend for a few hours that life was simple. Inside, the babysitter reported that Sophie had been good, had finished her homework, had gone to bed without argument. Adam paid her and waited until she drove away before climbing the stairs to his daughter's room. Sophie was asleep, her dark hair spread across the pillow, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 3. Adam stood in the doorway watching her breathe, feeling his heart constrict with love and fear in equal measure. Everything he was doing, every risk he was taking, came back to this moment, to the fierce need to make sure she grew up safe, secure, in a world that didn't grind up people like them without thought. I'm trying to make things better, kiddo, he whispered. I hope you understand someday. She didn't stir, lost in whatever dreams 8-year-olds had, and Adam retreated to his own room where sleep was harder to find. The next day dawned gray and cold, spring still weeks away from arriving in earnest. Adam dropped Sophie at school, worked a morning shift at the warehouse, and met Clara at 2 in the afternoon at an address she'd texted him that morning. It was a security firm on the industrial edge of the city, the kind of place that looked deliberately unremarkable. Inside, the reception area was sparse but professional, and the woman at the desk clearly expected them. Miss Morgan, Mr. Blake, he's waiting for you in conference room B. He turned out to be a man in his 50s named David Reeves, built like someone who'd spent time in the military and never quite left it behind. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing as they settled on Adam. So you're the Good Samaritan, Reeves said, and there was something approving in his tone. Clara's told me about you. Nothing good, I hope, Adam replied, and was rewarded with a brief smile. They settled around a conference table while Clara pulled out her laptop and began laying out everything they'd gathered. Reeves listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, his expression neutral. Adam found himself studying the man, trying to determine if he could be trusted. Clara clearly thought so, but Adam's faith in other people's judgment had been shaken more than once. This is solid work, Reeves said when Clara finished. The financial records alone would be enough to trigger an investigation. Add in the attempted murder and you've got a federal case. But, Clara prompted because there was clearly a but coming. But Webb has friends in high places. If we move too soon, if the evidence isn't absolutely airtight, he'll use those connections to bury it. We need the identity of his contact, the person he paid to sabotage your car. Without that, Everything else is circumstantial. The phone number, Adam said. Can you trace it? I can try. Burner phones are designed to be untraceable, but people get sloppy. They use them near their homes, their workplaces, places that become patterns. Reeves pulled out his own laptop. Give me the number in 24 hours. I'll see what I can find. Clara provided the information, and Reeves began typing with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. Adam felt something loosen in his chest, the relief of having someone competent on their side, someone who'd done this before and knew the paths through the maze. In the meantime, Reeves continued, his fingers still moving across the keyboard, you both need to be extremely careful. If Webb gets even a hint that someone's investigating him, he'll escalate. Men like him don't react well to being cornered. I've been careful, Clara said. Have you? Reeves looked up, his gaze hard. Because someone tried to kill you 3 weeks ago, and you're still moving around without serious protection. That's not careful. That's reckless. I have a security detail that Webb probably knows about. Maybe even has someone inside. Reeves closed his laptop. I'm assigning you a protection team. People I trust, former colleagues who won't be compromised. They'll be subtle but present. And you, he turned to Adam. You're an unknown variable, which means you're Webb's blind spot. But the second he connects you to Clara, that advantage disappears. Have you noticed anyone following you? Strange cars, faces that show up too often? Adam thought about his drives home, the streets of Millridge that he knew by heart. No, but I'm not sure I'd recognize surveillance if I saw it. Then learn, fast. Reeves pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. This is my direct line. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately. Don't try to be a hero. Don't assume you can handle it. Just call. The weight of those words settled over Adam like a physical thing. This was real. The danger he'd been abstractly aware of suddenly felt concrete, immediate. He took the card, memorizing the number even as he pocketed it. How long until we can move? Clara asked. Depends on what I find with the phone number. Could be days, could be weeks. Reeves stood, signaling the meeting's end. But Clara, when we do move, it has to be decisive. We get one shot at this. If Webb walks, he'll make sure none of you ever gets close again. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. This wasn't just about justice or exposing corruption. It was about survival. For Clara, for Adam, for everyone Webb had hurt or would hurt if given the chance. They left the security firm separately. Another precaution, and Adam drove aimlessly for a while before heading to pick up Sophie from school. His mind was churning, processing everything Reeves had said, cataloging his own movements over the past weeks for anything that might have been surveillance. He found nothing, but the not knowing was almost worse than certainty. Sophie was full of chatter about her day, something about a science project and her friend Emma's birthday party next week. Adam listened with half his attention, the other half still stuck in that conference room, replaying warnings and possibilities. Dad, you're not listening, Sophie accused. Sorry, kiddo. Just thinking about work. You're always thinking about work lately. She crossed her arms, and the gesture was so much like her mother that Adam's heart ached. Is everything okay? He wanted to lie, to tell her everything was fine, that their lives would go back to normal soon. But Sophie was too smart for easy comfort, and he'd never been good at deception. Things are complicated right now, he said carefully, but I'm working on making them better. Can you trust me on that? She studied him with those serious eyes, and he saw her weighing his words against whatever instincts 8-year-olds had about adult truthfulness. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but if you need help, you'd tell me, right? Of course. He ruffled her hair, grateful when she didn't pull away. You're my partner in this life, always will be. That seemed to satisfy her, and they spent the rest of the evening in comfortable routine. Homework, dinner, a chapter from the book they were reading together. Normal things that felt precious, precisely because Adam knew how fragile they were. After Sophie went to bed, the burner phone buzzed with a message from Clara. Reeves just called. He found something. Meeting tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., same place. Adam's pulse quickened. Less than 24 hours, and Reeves had already made progress. That was either very good or very bad, and he wouldn't know which until tomorrow. He tried to sleep but gave up around midnight. moving to the living room where he'd spread Clara's files across the coffee table. He studied them with fresh eyes, looking for connections he might have missed, anything that could help them build an airtight case. Somewhere in these pages was the thread that would unravel Marcus Webb's carefully constructed life. Adam just had to find it. Dawn was breaking when the burner phone rang, not a text, but an actual call. Adam grabbed it on the second ring, his heart hammering. "Adam, it's Clara." Her voice was tight, controlled panic barely held in check. "Something's happened. Webb knows." Ice flooded his veins. "Knows what?" "That someone's investigating him. I don't know how, but he knows. I just got a call from my head of security. Someone tried to access my home servers remotely, tried to wipe the data we've been collecting. They failed, but..." She took a shaky breath. "This is him pushing back, testing our defenses." "Are you safe?" "For now. Reeves has people here. But Adam, if Webb knows about me, it's only a matter of time before he connects you to this. You need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For whatever comes next." She paused, and he heard voices in the background. "I have to go. The meeting with Reeves is still on, but we're moving it up. 8 a.m. instead of 10. Can you make it?" "I'll be there." "Good. And Adam, check on Sophie. Make sure she's safe." The call ended, leaving Adam standing in the gray dawn light of his living room, fear crystallizing into something close to terror. He moved quickly, quietly, climbing the stairs to Sophie's room and easing open the door. She was there, safe, still sleeping peacefully. But Adam stood watching her for a long time, memorizing the rise and fall of her chest, the small sounds she made in sleep. If Webb was escalating, if he was willing to come after Clara's data, what would stop him from threatening the people she'd connected with? What would stop him from threatening Sophie? Adam made a decision in that moment, standing in his daughter's doorway with dawn breaking outside. Whatever happened next, Sophie came first. Before justice, before revenge, before any of the noble reasons he'd convinced himself justified this risk. He pulled out his regular phone and called Sophie's grandmother. "Adam, it's 6 in the morning. I know, I'm sorry, but I need a favor." He kept his voice low, glancing back at Sophie to make sure she was still asleep. "Can you take Sophie for a week? Maybe longer? I've got some work situations that are complicated. I just want to make sure she's somewhere safe." There was a pause, and he could almost hear the questions forming, but Margaret Blake had buried her son's wife and watched her son-in-law struggle to hold things together. She knew when to push and when to simply help. "Of course. Bring her by whenever you need to." "Thank you. I'll drop her off after breakfast." "Adam, are you in trouble?" "I'm trying to make sure I'm not." It was the most honest answer he could give. "I'll explain everything when this is over." He hung up and spent the next 2 hours going through the motions of a normal morning, making breakfast and helping Sophie pack a bag for her grandmother's house. She was excited about the surprise visit, chattering about how she and Grandma could bake cookies and work on the puzzle they'd started at Christmas. Adam smiled and nodded and tried not to let her see the fear that was eating at him from the inside. He dropped her off at 8, hugged her harder than usual, and made himself let go when she started to squirm. "Be good for Grandma," he said. "Always am." She grinned and ran inside, her backpack bouncing. Adam sat in his truck for a full minute after the door closed, steadying himself. Sophie was safe. That was the only thing that mattered. Everything else could burn as long as she was okay. The security firm looked different in morning light, more exposed, less anonymous. Adam parked and was walking toward the entrance when he saw it. A black sedan, parked across the street, windows tinted too dark to see inside. It could have been nothing, could have been anyone. But his instincts, newly awakened and screaming, said otherwise. He memorized the license plate, looked for anything distinguishing about the vehicle, and walked inside with his spine prickling from the sensation of being watched. Reeves and Clara were already in the conference room, along with 2 other people Adam didn't recognize. A woman in her 30s with a military bearing, and a younger man who looked like he'd stepped out of a tech startup. "Adam, good!" Reeves gestured to a seat. "We need to move fast. Let me introduce you to the team. This is Rachel Torres, former Secret Service, now heading Clara's protection detail. And this is Marcus Chen, our tech specialist." Adam shook hands mechanically, his mind still on the sedan outside. There's a car across the street, black sedan, tinted windows, could be surveillance. Rachel and Reeves exchanged a glance. I'll check it out, Rachel said, already moving toward the door. What did you find? Clara asked Reeves, her voice tight. The burner phone Webb called traces to a location in South City, a garage that specializes in luxury car maintenance. Reeves pulled up images on his laptop. The owner is a man named Kyle Brennan, former mechanic, 3 priors for assault, known to work on vehicles for people who don't want questions asked. He's the one who sabotaged my car, Clara said. That's the theory. But here's where it gets interesting. Reeves clicked through several screens. Brennan made a second withdrawal from his account 2 days ago, large amount, cash, which suggests Webb might be paying him to disappear or paying him to finish the job, Adam finished. The room went quiet. Rachel returned, her expression grim. Sedan's gone. Either moved or I spooked them. But there are fresh tire marks, and the positioning was deliberate. Someone was watching this building. Then we're out of time, Clara said. We need to get to Brennan before Webb does. If he disappears or ends up dead, we lose our connection. Already working on it, Marcus said from his laptop. I've got eyes on Brennan's garage through traffic cameras. His car is there now. If we move in the next hour, we can intercept him. We? Adam asked. Rachel, me, and a backup team. Reeves looked at Clara. You stay here where it's secure. Adam, I'm coming with you. Like hell you are. You're a civilian. I'm the reason Clara's alive. I'm the one who planted that device. I've earned the right to see this through. Adam's voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Besides, if Webb's people are watching, they're looking for Clara and your team. They're not looking for me. Reeves started to argue, but Clara cut him off. He's right, and we need every advantage we can get. For a long moment, Reeves stared at Adam, assessing. Then he gave a short nod. Fine, but you follow orders, you stay in the vehicle until I say otherwise, and if shooting starts, you hit the ground and don't move. Understood? Understood. Rachel distributed earpieces to Adam and the others. We leave in 5 minutes, 2 vehicles, 1 primary, 1 backup. Adam, you're with me and Reeves in the primary. Marcus stays here with Miss Morgan and monitors from remote. The next 5 minutes were a blur of preparation. Adam was fitted with a vest. Just a precaution, according to Rachel, though the weight of it made everything feel more real. They moved to an unmarked SUV, and Adam found himself in the back seat as Rachel drove and Reeves coordinated with the backup team over radio. The city passed by outside, ordinary people going about ordinary days, completely unaware that in the vehicle beside them, something extraordinary was unfolding. Adam felt disconnected from it all, like he was watching himself in a movie, some version of his life that had veered wildly off script. Target location in 3 minutes, Rachel announced. Reeves turned to look at Adam. Last chance to back out. I'm not backing out. Then remember what I said. Stay in the vehicle, stay down, and don't try to be a hero. The garage came into view, a squat brick building with 3 bay doors, one of them open, revealing a luxury sedan on the lift. Adam saw a figure moving inside, someone in coveralls working beneath the vehicle. That's Brennan, Marcus confirmed through the earpiece. No other personnel visible. Rachel parked half a block down, positioning the vehicle so they had a clear line of sight. The backup team, wherever they were, remained invisible. Everything was quiet, controlled, professional. Then the world exploded into chaos. A second vehicle came screaming around the corner, a black SUV moving too fast, brakes squealing as it swerved into the garage lot. 2 men jumped out before it fully stopped, and Adam saw the glint of weapons in their hands. Contact, Rachel shouted. Armed suspects, moving on target location. Reeves was already on the radio, calling in the backup team, but Adam's eyes were locked on the garage. Brennan had seen the men, was running toward the back of the building, but he wasn't fast enough. One of the men raised his weapon. Adam didn't think. He moved. He was out of the SUV before Rachel could stop him, running toward the garage with his heart hammering and his mind screaming that this was insane. Behind him, he heard Rachel cursing, heard Reeves shouting orders, but he didn't stop. He'd spent months being careful, being invisible, avoiding confrontation. But something in him had broken when he pulled Clara from that wreck, and he couldn't go back to being the man who walked away. Brennan stumbled, and one of the gunmen was raising his weapon for a clear shot when Adam crashed into him from the side. They went down hard, the weapon clattering away across concrete, and Adam felt pain explode in his ribs where the man's elbow connected. He'd been in exactly 2 fights in his life, both in high school, and he'd lost both. But adrenaline and desperation made up for lack of skill, and he managed to keep the man pinned for the 3 seconds it took for Rachel to arrive. She had her weapon drawn, her voice commanding, "Don't move! Hands where I can see them!" The second gunman was already on the ground. Reeves and 2 other agents Adam hadn't seen arrive surrounding him. Brennan was pressed against the far wall, eyes wide with terror. "Clear!" someone shouted, and the immediate danger evaporated, replaced by the organized chaos of law enforcement securing a scene. Reeves hauled Adam to his feet, and his expression was equal parts furious and impressed. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I wasn't," Adam admitted, wincing as pain lanced through his ribs. "Is everyone's fine except you, you idiot. Rachel, get him checked out. I need to secure the witness." The next hour was a blur of EMTs, statements, and trying to process what had just happened. Adam's ribs were bruised but not broken, a small miracle considering how hard he'd hit the concrete. The 2 gunmen were in custody, and Brennan was talking, not to Adam, but to Reeves and a team of federal agents who'd arrived with impressive speed. Clara arrived at some point, her face pale but determined. She stood beside Adam as they watched through the garage window while Brennan gave his statement, his hands shaking as he spoke. "He's telling them everything," Rachel said, moving to stand beside them. "Webb's name, the payment, the instructions for sabotaging your car. It's all coming out." "Is it enough?" Clara asked. "Combined with your financial records and the attempted hit we just stopped?" "Yeah, it's enough." Rachel smiled grimly. "Webb's done." Adam felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying for weeks finally releasing. They'd done it. Against all odds, against every advantage Webb had, they'd actually done it. But the victory felt muted, overshadowed by the realization of how close they'd come to losing. If those gunmen had arrived 5 minutes earlier, if backup hadn't been nearby, if Adam had stayed in the vehicle like he was supposed to. "You could have been killed," Clara said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "But I wasn't. That's not the point." She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to risk yourself for someone you barely know." "Yes, I did." Adam said it with more certainty than he felt. "Because if I'd stayed in that vehicle, if I'd watched someone die when I could have prevented it, I wouldn't have been able to live with myself." Clara studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "You're a good man, Adam Blake. Better than you realize. I'm just trying to be someone my daughter can be proud of. She already is, whether you know it or not." Before Adam could respond, Reeves emerged from the garage with a satisfied expression. "We've got enough for an arrest warrant. FBI's moving on Webb's location now. He'll be in custody within the hour." The words should have felt triumphant, but Adam mostly felt exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind aches and a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with physical injury. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we let the system work," Reeves said. "Brennan's testimony, the financial records, the attempted hit, it's all admissible evidence. Webb will go to trial, and unless he has judges in his pocket we don't know about, he'll be convicted. And Clara? We'll need to testify, but she'll be safe. We'll make sure of it." Reeves clasped Adam's shoulder. "You did good today. Stupid, reckless, and against every instruction I gave you, but good." Adam managed a tired smile. "Thanks. I think." They let him go an hour later, after more statements and assurances that his involvement would be kept as quiet as possible. Clara offered to have him driven home, but Adam declined. He needed time alone, time to process everything that had happened. He picked up Sophie from his mother-in-law's house, grateful beyond words to see her safe and oblivious to the day's events. She chattered about the cookies they'd baked and the puzzle they'd almost finished, and Adam held her hand as they walked to the truck, silently promising that he'd never put her at risk like that again. That night, after Sophie was asleep, the burner phone buzzed one last time. They arrested Webb at his estate. He didn't go quietly, but he went. "It's over, Adam. We did it." Adam read the message 3 times, letting the reality of it settle into his bones. Marcus Webb, the man who'd destroyed so many lives, who'd tried to kill Clara and nearly succeeded, was in custody. Justice, slow and imperfect as it was, had finally arrived. He thought about responding, about crafting something meaningful to mark the end of this strange chapter in his life. But in the end, he simply typed, "Thank you for trusting me." Clara's response came quickly. "Thank you for being trustworthy. Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." Adam set the phone aside and moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street beyond his cabin. The world looked the same as it had that night 3 weeks ago when he'd pulled a stranger from a wrecked car. But everything had changed. He'd changed. Somewhere in the process of fighting back, of refusing to be invisible, he'd found something he'd thought was lost forever. Not happiness, not yet, but purpose. The knowledge that he mattered, that his choices could make a difference, that being decent in an indecent world wasn't weakness, but strength. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Webb's arrest would make news, would drag both him and Clara into spotlights neither wanted. There would be trials, testimony, consequences that rippled outward in ways they couldn't predict. But tonight, Adam Blake stood in his small cabin with his daughter sleeping safely upstairs and allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. The media descended like locusts within 24 hours. Adam woke to the sound of his phone ringing, his real phone, not the burner, and made the mistake of answering before checking the caller ID. A reporter from the regional newspaper wanted a statement about his role in exposing Marcus Webb's crimes. Adam hung up without responding, but the call was followed by 3 more in quick succession, each from a different outlet, each asking variations of the same questions. By noon, there were 2 news vans parked on the street outside his cabin. Sophie pressed her face to the window, eyes wide with confusion and excitement. "Dad, why are there TV cameras outside?" "It's complicated, sweetheart." Adam pulled the curtains closed, his jaw tight. "Just stay away from the windows for now, okay?" "But what did you do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What had he done? Helped expose a criminal, prevented a murder, risked his life for someone who'd once destroyed his livelihood. How did you explain that to an 8-year-old without making it sound either meaningless or terrifying? "I helped someone who needed help," he said finally. "And some people think that's interesting enough to make news." Sophie considered this with the gravity children brought to adult mysteries. "Was it dangerous?" "A little." "Are you in trouble?" "No, kiddo. I promise." He knelt down to her level, meeting her eyes directly. "But things might be weird for a while. People might ask you questions about me, about us. If that happens, you don't have to answer. You just tell them to talk to me instead, okay?" She nodded solemnly, and Adam hated that he'd brought this chaos into her life. The whole point of staying invisible had been to protect her from exactly this kind of attention. Now reporters were camped outside their home, and it was only a matter of time before they descended on her school. The burner phone buzzed. "I'm so sorry. I should have anticipated this. Do you need somewhere else to stay?" Adam typed back, "We'll manage. But if they show up at Sophie's school, we're going to have a problem." Clara's response was immediate. "Already handled. I've arranged for private security at the school. Discreet, but present. No one will bother her, I promise." He wanted to be angry about her high-handed assumption that she could fix his problems with money and resources. But mostly, he just felt relieved. Whatever else Clara Morgan was, she understood that Sophie was off limits, and she had the means to enforce that boundary. The day crawled by in a strange limbo. Adam called his warehouse supervisor and explained he needed a few days off. Didn't specify why, but the man had clearly seen the news. There was an uncomfortable pause before he agreed, and Adam heard the shift in his tone. Curiosity, maybe, or wariness at having someone suddenly notorious on the payroll. That evening, after the news vans had finally given up and departed, Adam's mother-in-law called. "I've been watching the news," Margaret said without preamble. "They're saying you helped catch that CEO, the one who tried to kill someone. Is that true?" Adam leaned against the kitchen counter, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. "Yeah, it's true." And you didn't think to mention this when you dropped Sophie off yesterday? That you were involved in something dangerous? I was trying to keep her safe. That's why I brought her to you. By lying about why? Margaret's voice rose, anger mixing with fear. Adam, if something had happened to you, if those men had killed you at that garage, Sophie would have been waiting at my house wondering why her father never came to pick her up. Do you understand that? Do you understand what that would have done to her? The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Adam closed his eyes, seeing Sophie's face, imagining the confusion and grief if he'd been stupid enough to get himself killed playing hero. You're right, he said quietly. I should have told you. I should have been honest about the risk. Damn right you should have. Margaret took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. Adam, I know you're trying to do the right thing. I know these past months have been hard, but Sophie needs you alive and present more than she needs you to be some kind of vigilante. I wasn't trying to be a vigilante. I was just trying to help someone. And that someone nearly got you killed, but she didn't. I'm fine. Bruised, but fine. This time. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Is it over? Whatever this was, is it finished now? Adam thought about Webb in custody, about the trials that would follow, the testimony he'd inevitably have to give. Not entirely, but the dangerous part is done. Good, because Sophie's been through enough loss in her young life. She doesn't need to lose you too. They talked for a few more minutes, Margaret extracting promises that Adam would be more careful, more honest, more present. He agreed to everything because she was right and because arguing would have required energy he didn't have. After hanging up, Adam found Sophie in the living room, supposedly doing homework, but clearly listening to his conversation. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded. Grandma's mad at you, she observed. Yeah, she has good reason to be. Because of the dangerous thing you did? Adam sat beside her on the couch, trying to find words that were honest without being frightening. You remember how I told you I helped someone who needed help? Sophie nodded. Well, helping her meant stopping some bad people from hurting her, and that was more dangerous than I expected it to be. Grandma's upset because I could have gotten hurt, and that would have been really bad for you. Would you have died? The question was small, frightened, and it broke something in Adam's chest. No, sweetheart. I was never in that much danger, I promise. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Sophie didn't need to know how close he'd come to not making it home. And it's over now. The bad people are in jail and everything's going back to normal. Is the lady you helped going to come visit? The question surprised him. Maybe. Would that be okay? Sophie shrugged with studied casualness. I guess. Is she nice? She's complicated. But yeah, I think she's trying to be good. Okay? Sophie returned to her homework, the subject apparently closed, but Adam saw the tension in her shoulders. She was worried, processing things she was too young to fully understand, and he hated that he'd put that burden on her. That night, after Sophie was in bed, Adam sat at his kitchen table with a beer he wasn't really drinking and tried to figure out what came next. The immediate crisis was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. There would be legal proceedings, media attention, and the uncomfortable reality that his anonymous life had been irrevocably shattered. He'd wanted to matter. Well, now he mattered. Now people knew his name, knew his face, knew that he'd been instrumental in bringing down Marcus Webb, and he wasn't sure yet if that was a gift or a curse. The burner phone rang. Actually rang, not just buzzed, and Adam answered to find Clara's voice, uncharacteristically uncertain. I know it's late. I hope I'm not disturbing you. You're not. Can't sleep anyway. Neither can I. She paused. The prosecutor called today. They want us both to testify at Webb's arraignment next week. Just preliminary stuff, but it means facing him in court. Adam felt his stomach tighten. How do you feel about that? Terrified, if I'm being honest. He tried to kill me, and now I have to sit in a room with him and explain to a judge why he should be denied bail. Her laugh was brittle. But at least I won't be alone. You'll be there too. Yeah, I will. Adam? She hesitated, and he heard something vulnerable in her voice that she usually kept hidden. Can I ask you something? And will you be honest with me? Always. Do you regret it? Helping me? Because I know what it's cost you, the media attention, the danger you were in, the disruption to your life. If you could go back to that night in the storm, knowing what you know now, would you still pull me from that car? It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. Adam thought about the past 3 weeks, about the fear and adrenaline and moments when he'd wondered if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. He thought about Sophie's worried face and his mother-in-law's anger and the reporters camped outside his home. But he also thought about standing in that garage, about stopping men who would have killed Kyle Brennan without hesitation, about the knowledge that Marcus Webb was in custody, that his corruption had been exposed, that communities like Millridge might have a chance at survival now. No, he said finally. I wouldn't change it, not the helping you part anyway. Maybe I'd be smarter about some of the other choices, but pulling you from that car? That was the right thing to do, and I'd do it again. He heard her breath catch, just slightly. Thank you for saying that, for meaning it. It's the truth. I know. That's what makes it matter. She was quiet for a moment. The board met today. Emergency session to discuss Webb's arrest and what it means for the company. They asked me to step down. What? Adam sat up straighter. Why? You're the victim in all this. Officially, they want to minimize disruption during this difficult period. Unofficially, they're terrified that the scandal will tank our stock price and they want a scapegoat. Her voice was remarkably calm, as if she'd already processed and accepted this betrayal. I refused, obviously, told them they'd have to remove me by force, and good luck doing that when I own 35% of the company and just exposed one of their own as a criminal. Good for you. We'll see. I might have just started a different kind of war. She sighed. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight I just wanted to hear your voice, to remember why I'm fighting for this company instead of walking away. And did it help? More than you know, she paused. Get some sleep, Adam. Next week is going to be difficult for both of us. They said their goodbyes, and Adam sat in the darkness of his kitchen, thinking about Clara alone in whatever expensive house she called home, fighting battles on multiple fronts with the kind of exhaustion he recognized from his own life. The arraignment was scheduled for Monday morning at 10. Adam arranged for Sophie to stay with Emma's family, borrowed a suit from a neighbor who was approximately his size, and drove into the city with his stomach in knots. The courthouse was a fortress of granite and glass, stairs leading up to columns that were meant to project authority and justice. Adam climbed them slowly, hyper-aware of the cameras scattered around the entrance, the reporters who called out questions he didn't answer. Inside, security was tight. He passed through metal detectors, submitted to a bag search he'd anticipated by leaving everything except his wallet at home, and finally made his way to the courtroom where Clara was already waiting. She wore a navy suit that was simultaneously professional and severe, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. The armor of someone preparing for battle. When she saw Adam, relief flickered across her face. You came. Said I would. He took the seat beside her in the gallery. How are you holding up? Ask me again in an hour. She glanced toward the front of the courtroom where prosecutors were setting up their materials. Reeves is testifying too. He's around here somewhere. As if summoned, David Reeves appeared, nodded to them both, and took a seat nearby. The courtroom was filling now. Other witnesses, reporters, people Adam didn't recognize but who clearly had some stake in the proceedings. And then Marcus Webb was let in. Adam had only seen him from a distance at the gala, but up close the man was somehow both more and less impressive. More because he carried himself with absolute confidence despite the handcuffs, less because now Adam could see the calculation behind every expression, the careful performance of a man who'd built his life on manipulation. Webb's eyes swept the courtroom and landed on Clara. Something passed between them. Recognition, hatred, a promise of future retribution, and Adam saw Clara's hands tighten in her lap. Don't look at him, Adam said quietly. He doesn't get that from you. She nodded and fixed her gaze forward as the judge entered and the arraignment began. The proceedings were surprisingly brief and dry. A recitation of charges, arguments about bail, procedural motions that meant little to Adam's untrained ear. But he listened carefully as the prosecutor laid out the case: embezzlement, attempted murder, conspiracy. a litany of crimes that added up to decades in prison if convicted. Webb's lawyer, an expensive suit with practiced indignation, argued that his client was a pillar of the community, that the charges were based on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of a convicted felon, that bail should be granted immediately. The prosecutor countered with Clara's testimony, not live, but submitted in writing and read aloud. Adam listened to her words, clinical and precise, describing the crash and her certainty that it had been no accident, describing the threat she'd received, the evidence they'd gathered, the conclusion that Marcus Webb had orchestrated her attempted murder. When his own statement was read, Adam felt surreal hearing his words in someone else's voice. The night in the storm, the decision to help, the investigation that followed. It sounded like someone else's life, some character in a story rather than the reality he'd lived. The judge listened to everything with an expression of careful neutrality. When the arguments concluded, she didn't hesitate. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody pending trial. Given the severity of the charges and the evidence of flight risk, I see no reason to grant release at this time. Webb's face remained impassive, but Adam saw his lawyer's shoulders sag fractionally. It was a victory, small but significant. Webb would spend the months until trial in a cell rather than his mansion, unable to intimidate witnesses or destroy evidence. As they led Webb away, he turned one last time to look at Clara. His mouth moved, forming words Adam couldn't hear but could guess at. Threats, probably. Promises that this wasn't over. Clara held his gaze without flinching until he disappeared through the door. Outside, on the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed. Adam tried to slip past them, but someone recognized him and suddenly microphones were thrust in his face, questions coming too fast to parse. Mr. Blake, how does it feel to be a hero? Did you know Ms. Morgan before the accident? Were you afraid when you confronted the gunman? Is it true Morgan Industries plans to compensate you for your role? That last question made him stop. What? A reporter, young and eager, pushed closer. There are reports that Clara Morgan is planning to offer you a financial reward or position within her company. Can you comment? I haven't heard anything about that. Adam looked around for Clara, but she'd been swallowed by her own crowd of reporters. I need to go. He pushed through, ignoring the continued questions, and found his truck in the parking garage. His hand shook as he started the engine. Reaction delayed, but hitting hard now. He'd just sat in a courtroom with a man who'd tried to kill someone, had listened to his own near-death experience reduced to legal jargon and evidentiary procedure. The burner phone buzzed before he'd made it out of the garage. I'm sorry about the reporters. And sorry you had to hear about the compensation that way. Can we talk? Adam pulled over, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of him wanted to ignore the message, to drive home and pretend this whole chapter of his life was finished. But Clara deserved better than being ghosted after everything they'd been through. Your place or mine? He typed back. The response came quickly. Neutral ground. There's a park on Riverside near the old mill. Can you meet me there in an hour? Adam agreed and spent the intervening time driving aimlessly, trying to organize his thoughts. Compensation, a position in her company. Part of him was insulted. He hadn't done this for money, hadn't asked for anything beyond the chance to stop a bad man from getting away with his crimes. But another part, the pragmatic father who needed to provide for his daughter, couldn't help calculating what kind of difference that money could make. New shoes for Sophie, a better apartment, maybe even the start of a college fund. He hated that he was thinking about it. Hated that Clara had put him in a position where accepting felt like being bought and refusing felt like prideful stupidity. The park was nearly empty when he arrived, just a few joggers and a woman walking her dog. Clara sat on a bench overlooking the river, and she stood when she saw him approach. Thank you for coming. You said we needed to talk. We do. She gestured to the bench and they sat, maintaining a careful distance between them. I should have told you about my plans before they leaked to the press. That was unfair of me. What plans exactly? Adam kept his voice neutral. Morgan Industries owes you more than gratitude. You risked your life multiple times to help me. The board, what's left of it anyway, has approved a compensation package. $500,000, paid as a lump sum or in installments, however you prefer. The number staggered him. $500,000. More money than he'd earn in 10 years, maybe 15. Life-changing money. That's too much, he said automatically. It's not nearly enough. You can't put a price on someone's life. Clara turned to face him. But there's more. I'm restructuring the company, bringing in new leadership, changing how we do business. I want to reopen the Millridge plant. Not at full capacity, not right away, but enough to bring back 100 jobs within 6 months. More later if we can make the numbers work. Adam stared at her, trying to process what he was hearing. You're reopening the factory? With conditions. Better safety standards, fair wages, profit sharing for employees. I'm done running a company that treats people as disposable. She met his eyes. And I want you to be part of it. Not on the line, as a consultant. Community liaison, maybe, helping me understand what workers actually need instead of what boardrooms think they need. I don't have experience. You have something better. You've lived the reality of what my decisions cost. You understand these communities in a way I never will. She paused. I'm not offering you charity, Adam. I'm offering you a job that needs doing and that you're qualified for. Whether you take it or not, the compensation stands. You earned that regardless. Adam looked out at the river, watching water slide past beneath the spring sun. 6 weeks ago, he'd been stacking boxes in a warehouse, invisible and angry and slowly drowning in his own diminished life. Now he was being offered more money than he'd ever imagined having, and a chance to help rebuild what had been destroyed. It should have been an easy decision. It wasn't. I need time to think about it, he said finally. The money, the job, all of it. It's a lot. Of course. Take whatever time you need. Clara stood, preparing to leave, then hesitated. Can I ask what's holding you back? Is it pride? Because if it is, I understand, but it's not pride. Adam cut her off, then softened his tone. Or maybe it is, partly, but mostly it's that I don't know if I can trust this. Any of this. You fired me 6 months ago without a second thought. Now you're offering me a fortune and a job that sounds too good to be true. What happens when the media moves on and you don't need a redemption story anymore? Do I get fired again? The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but Clara didn't flinch. If anything, she looked like she'd been expecting the accusation. You're right to be skeptical. I've given you no reason to trust me. She sat back down, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of something that had been building for a long time. I inherited my father's company and his philosophy, but I didn't inherit his courage. When Webb pushed for the restructuring, when he made his case for closing plants and cutting costs, I knew it was wrong. I knew it would destroy communities like yours, but I told myself it was necessary, that I was choosing the lesser evil, that saving some jobs was better than saving none. You were wrong. I was a coward. She said it flatly, without self-pity. I let Webb and people like him dictate terms because standing up to them felt too hard, too risky. And people like you paid the price for my weakness. Adam wanted to argue, to tell her she was being too hard on herself, but he couldn't, because she was right. She'd made a choice, and that choice had consequences that rippled through hundreds of lives. So what's different now, he asked. Now I've seen what happens when you refuse to be pushed around, when you do the difficult thing because it's right, not because it's easy. She looked at him directly. You could have walked past my car that night. You could have left me to freeze. You definitely could have refused to help me investigate Webb, but you didn't. You chose to be inconvenienced, to be endangered, to matter. And that's what I'm trying to learn how to do. The honesty of it disarmed him. Adam had spent weeks seeing Clara as an abstract figure, the CEO, the victim, the ally. But sitting beside her now, hearing the self-recrimination in her voice, he saw just another person trying to do better than they had been. The money's real, Clara continued. The job offer is real. And if you take it, there will be a contract that protects you from being arbitrarily fired. I'm not looking for a redemption story or good PR. I'm looking for someone who'll tell me when I'm wrong, who understands what's at stake when corporations make decisions that affect real lives. And you think that's me? I think you're the only person who's been honest with me in years. That's worth more than any credential. She stood again. Think about it. Really think about it. And whatever you decide, know that the compensation is yours regardless. You earned it by being a decent human being when it would have been easier not to be. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Adam alone on the bench with thoughts that wouldn't settle into any coherent pattern. He sat there for nearly an hour, watching the river and trying to imagine what each choice would look like. Take the money and the job, risk trusting Clara again, maybe help rebuild something meaningful, or refuse it all, maintain his independence, keep living in the margins, but at least know he owed nothing to anyone. Sophie would want him to take it. Margaret would counsel caution. Reeves would probably say something about not looking gift horses in the mouth. But the only opinion that really mattered was his own, and he couldn't quite figure out what that was yet. He drove home as the sun was setting, picked up Sophie from Emma's house, and made dinner with half his attention while she told him about her day. After she went to bed, he pulled out a notebook and did something he hadn't done since high school, made a list of pros and cons. The pros column filled quickly: financial security, meaningful work, a chance to help Milridge recover, showing Sophie that taking risks could pay off. The cons were harder to articulate but felt heavier: dependence on Clara's goodwill, media attention that came with being publicly associated with her, the risk of being used and discarded again, the fundamental question of whether he could trust someone who'd already proven capable of making decisions that destroyed lives. He was still staring at the list when his phone rang. Regular phone this time. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Mr. Blake? This is Jennifer Cortez from Channel 7 News. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Clara Morgan, and Adam hung up without listening to the rest. His relationship with Clara. As if there was a relationship beyond circumstantial alliance and mutual necessity. Except that wasn't quite true anymore, was it? Somewhere in the process of investigation and danger and sitting through an arraignment together, something had shifted. Not friendship exactly, but recognition. The understanding that they'd both been broken by circumstances beyond their control and were trying to figure out how to be whole again. The burner phone buzzed. Saw the news. Reporter ambush. I'm sorry. Want me to have my lawyer send cease and desist letters? Adam considered letting her, then realized that would just make him more interesting to journalists. Better to be boring, to give them nothing to report. No. Let them lose interest naturally. But thanks for offering. Anytime. And Adam? No pressure on the offer. Whatever you decide is okay. He set both phones aside and returned to his list, adding one more item to the cons column. Emotional complication. Because that's what Clara was becoming, whether he liked it or not. Someone who mattered beyond the practical alliance they'd formed. Someone whose opinion he valued, whose approval he found himself wanting. That was dangerous territory for a man who'd spent years keeping everyone at arm's length, who'd learned that caring too much just meant more ways to be hurt. But it was also exhilarating in a way he'd almost forgotten was possible. Adam stared at his list for another 20 minutes, then picked up a pen and wrote a single word at the bottom. Yes. He'd take the money. He'd take the job. Not because he trusted Clara completely, not because he thought it was risk-free, but because Sophie deserved a father who believed that good things could still happen if you had the courage to reach for them. He picked up the burner phone and typed, I'm in. When do we start? The response came almost immediately, and he could picture Clara's relief through the screen. Monday. If you're serious about this, let's do it right. Come to the office. We'll make it official. I'll be there. Thank you, Adam, for everything. He wanted to say something meaningful back, something that captured the strange journey they'd been on together, but sometimes the simplest words carried the most weight. You're welcome. See you Monday. That weekend passed in a blur of practical arrangements and mounting anticipation. Adam told Sophie about the job offer in terms she could understand. He'd be helping people find work, helping make sure companies treated workers fairly. She'd been excited, asking if that meant they could get a bigger apartment and if she could have a dog. Maybe, he'd said, not wanting to promise too much too soon. We'll see how it goes. Margaret had been more skeptical when he called to tell her. Just be careful, she'd warned. Rich people don't give away $500,000 without expecting something in return. She's expecting me to do a job. That seems fair. You know what I mean. Don't let yourself be used again. I won't. I promise. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Adam, dressed in the borrowed suit, made Sophie breakfast and dropped her at school with a hug that lasted slightly too long. "You're being weird again," she observed. "Just excited about the first day, like when you started second grade." "You weren't this huggy then." "Well, I'm making up for it now." He kissed her forehead. "Have a good day, kiddo. Love you." "Love you too, Dad. Good luck with your new job." The Morgan Industries headquarters was downtown, a glass and steel tower that Adam had passed 100 times without ever imagining he'd walk through its doors. Security was expecting him, providing a badge and directions to the executive floor without hesitation. Clara's office was on the 23rd floor, with windows that overlooked the city and furniture that probably cost more than Adam's annual salary used to be. She stood when he entered, professional and warm at the same time. "You came." "Said I would." He accepted her handshake, noting the firmness of it. "Ready to put me to work?" "Almost." She gestured to a folder on her desk. "First, the official stuff. This is your employment contract. Take it home. Have a lawyer review it if you want. But the key points are, you're hired as a senior consultant for community development and worker relations. Initial term of 3 years, renewable. Salary of $120,000 per year plus benefits. And the compensation we discussed is separate, legally distinct from your employment." Adam picked up the contract, flipping through pages of dense legal language. The numbers she'd mentioned jumped out at him, impossible and real at the same time. "This is generous." "It's fair. You're bringing something to this company that we desperately need. Perspective." Clara moved to the window, looking out at the city below. "I meant what I said about restructuring. Webb's arrest exposed cracks that go deeper than one corrupt board member. We've been operating with a philosophy that maximizes profit at the expense of everything else. That changes now." "And the board is okay with that?" 3 members resigned last week. 2 more are likely to follow. The ones who remain understand that this is the only way forward. She turned back to him. "It won't be easy. There will be resistance, both internal and external. People who think I'm being naive or reckless, but having you here speaking for the communities we've impacted gives me leverage I wouldn't have otherwise." Adam understood what she wasn't saying. He was both ally and shield, someone whose story made her reforms more palatable. It should have bothered him more than it did. "When do you want me to start?" "Today, if you're ready. I'm meeting with the planning committee this afternoon to discuss the Millridge reopening. I'd like you there." The afternoon meeting was everything Adam had feared and hoped for. A conference room full of executives and analysts, all of whom looked at him with varying degrees of skepticism when Clara introduced him. But she'd positioned him not as a charity case, but as an expert, someone with knowledge they lacked, and that framing mattered. The discussion was technical, full of jargon about capacity and margins and supply chains. But when it came time to talk about workforce, Clara turned to Adam. "What do you think Millridge needs most?" she asked. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled to him. Adam took a breath and thought about his neighbors, the people he'd known for years who were now scattered or struggling. "Stability," he said. "Not promises about what might happen in 6 months or a year. Concrete commitments that they can plan their lives around. Because when you shut down that plant, you didn't just take away jobs. You took away people's ability to believe that if they worked hard and did everything right, they'd be okay. You broke trust. Opening the plant again is good, but it won't matter if people think you'll just close it again when the numbers don't look perfect." The room was silent. Some faces showed understanding, others showed irritation at the implicit criticism. But Clara was nodding. "So what do we need to do?" she asked. "Long-term contracts, investment in training so people can adapt if industries shift, transparency about the company's financial health, so workers aren't blindsided by future restructuring. And profit sharing. If the company does well, the people who made that happen should benefit." One of the executives, a man in his 60s with silver hair, scoffed. "That's not how business works." "Then maybe business needs to work differently," Adam replied, keeping his voice level. "Because the old way led to Marcus Webb and corruption and communities that turned into ghost towns. If that's success, I'd hate to see what failure looks like." Clara smiled slightly, and Adam realized she'd orchestrated this moment deliberately. Put him in a room where his outsider status was both vulnerability and strength. where his anger on behalf of Millridge could be channeled into something productive. The meeting continued for another hour, details emerging about timeline and budget and logistics. By the end, they had the outline of a plan. 50 jobs within 3 months, 100 within 6, with possibilities for more growth depending on market conditions. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything Millridge had lost, but it was something real, something tangible, and Adam left the meeting feeling like maybe this could actually work. Clara walked him out, and at the elevator she paused. "You did well in there. Better than I expected, honestly." "You mean I didn't embarrass you?" "I mean you spoke truth to people who aren't used to hearing it. That takes courage." She pressed the elevator button. "This is going to be complicated, Adam. There will be setbacks and fights and moments when you wonder why you agreed to this. But I think we can actually make a difference. Together." The elevator arrived, doors sliding open. Adam stepped inside and turned to face her. "I hope you're right," he said, "because I'm betting everything on it." The doors closed, and Adam rode down 23 floors feeling like he'd just committed to something far bigger than a job. He'd committed to believing again, in Clara, in the possibility of change, in the idea that one person's choices could ripple outward and reshape the world in small but meaningful ways. It was terrifying. It was necessary. And as he walked out of Morgan Industries headquarters into the afternoon sun, Adam Blake allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in months. Not quite happiness, not yet, but the foundation it was built on. Spring arrived in earnest over the following weeks, transforming Millridge from gray desolation into something that almost resembled hope. The Morgan Industries plant had been closed for 8 months, its parking lot empty except for weeds pushing through cracked asphalt, but now construction crews swarmed the building like determined ants, repairing what neglect had broken. Adam found himself driving past it most mornings on his way to drop Sophie at school, watching progress that felt both impossibly slow and miraculously fast. New windows replacing boarded ones, fresh paint covering graffiti. The sign out front, once faded and listing, now straightened and cleaned until the company name gleamed in the early light. Sophie noticed everything with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Is that where you used to work?" she asked one morning, pressing her face to the truck window. "It is, and where a lot of people will work again soon." "Because of you and that lady? Ms. Morgan, yeah, we're trying to fix what got broken." Sophie considered this with the gravity she brought to important questions. "Can you fix everything that's broken?" Adam felt the weight of that inquiry settle into his chest. "No, kiddo, some things stay broken, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't fix what we can." She seemed satisfied with that answer, or at least willing to accept it, and they finished the drive to school in comfortable silence. These moments were what Adam treasured most, the ordinary rhythms of single parenthood, the small conversations that mattered more than grand gestures. Whatever else happened with Morgan Industries, with Clara, with the complicated new shape his life had taken, Sophie remained the center. The reason for everything. His work with Clara had evolved into something neither of them had fully anticipated. What started as a consulting position had become a partnership, two people working toward the same goal from different angles. So she handled the boardroom politics and financial maneuvering, while Adam became the bridge between corporate decisions and community needs. He spent his days meeting with former employees, listening to their concerns and carrying those voices back to the company. Some people were eager to return, grateful for second chances. Others were wary, scarred by betrayal, and unwilling to trust that this time would be different. Adam understood both reactions intimately. "They want guarantees," he told Clara during one of their weekly planning meetings. "They want to know this isn't just PR, that 6 months from now, you won't decide it's not profitable enough and shut everything down again." Clara nodded, making notes on her tablet. They were in her office, afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and Adam had long since stopped feeling out of place in this rarefied environment. What kind of guarantees would be meaningful? Contracts. Real ones, not at-will employment that can be terminated for any reason. Job security tied to performance, not quarterly earnings. He leaned forward. And visibility. Let them see the company's financial health, understand the metrics that drive decisions. Transparency breeds trust. The board will fight me on that. They think workers don't need to understand corporate finances. The board is wrong, People aren't stupid. They know when they're being lied to or kept in the dark. Adam held her gaze. You want Millridge to succeed? Treat people like partners, not assets. She smiled slightly. You don't pull punches, do you? You hired me to be honest. That's what you're getting. I did, and I'm grateful for it, even when it's uncomfortable. She set down her tablet. I'm presenting the new worker contract structure to the board next week. I'd like you there. To say what you're saying now? To say it better than I can. You've lived what they've only theorized. That matters. Adam agreed, though the prospect of facing the board again made his stomach tighten. His first meeting had been fractious enough. This one promised to be worse, because what Clara was proposing fundamentally challenged how Morgan Industries had operated for decades. The weekend before the board meeting, Clara invited Adam and Sophie to dinner at her home. It was the first time she'd extended such a personal invitation, and Adam's first instinct was to decline. But Sophie had overheard the call and was immediately intrigued by the idea of seeing where rich people live, and he couldn't bring himself to disappoint her. Clara's house turned out to be less ostentatious than Adam had feared. A craftsman-style home on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by old trees and a garden that showed signs of recent neglect. She met them at the door wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair loose, looking more relaxed than Adam had ever seen her. You must be Sophie, Clara said, kneeling to the girl's level. Your father talks about you constantly. Sophie studied Clara with the frank assessment children brought to new adults. He says you're helping people get jobs back. We're trying to. Your dad is actually doing most of the hard work. He's good at helping people. Sophie said it matter-of-factly, a simple truth she'd observed. He helped you in the snow. Clara's expression softened. He did. I'm very lucky he found me that night. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Clara had ordered pizza. I'm a terrible cook, she admitted cheerfully, and they ate in her kitchen while Sophie peppered her with questions about the company, about business, about what it was like being in charge of so many people. Clara answered each question seriously, never talking down, and Adam watched the two of them with something warm expanding in his chest. After dinner, Sophie discovered a grand piano in Clara's living room and begged to hear her play. Clara hesitated, then sat down at the bench and began a piece Adam didn't recognize but found achingly beautiful. Sophie listened with rapt attention, and when the music ended, she clapped enthusiastically. That was really pretty. Can you teach me? I'm not much of a teacher, but maybe your dad could arrange lessons for you? Could you, Dad? Please? Adam looked at his daughter's hopeful face and felt his resistance crumble. We'll see. Maybe when things settle down a bit. Things are never going to settle down, Clara observed quietly, but she was smiling. That's not how life works. You just learn to find moments of peace in the chaos. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep on Clara's couch and Adam carried her to the truck, Clara walked him out to the driveway. The night was cool and clear, stars visible despite the ambient light from the city. Thank you for coming, Clara said. I know this was probably awkward. It wasn't. Sophie had a great time. She's wonderful. You've done an incredible job with her. I've done my best. Some days that's enough, some days it's not. Adam looked back at the house, at the warm light spilling from windows. Can I ask you something? Why did you really invite us here? Claire was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. Because somewhere in all of this, the investigation, the work, the rebuilding, you became a friend, and I realized I don't have many of those. People I can trust. People who see me as something other than a CEO or a problem to solve. She met his eyes. I wanted Sophie to know me as a person, not just a name her father mentions. Does that make sense? It made more sense than Adam wanted to admit. He'd been keeping Clara at arm's length emotionally, maintaining professional distance as a form of self-protection. But standing here in her driveway, seeing the vulnerability she usually kept hidden, he realized that barrier had already eroded without him noticing. Yeah, he said quietly. It makes sense. Good. She smiled. Get Sophie home. And Adam? Thank you for trusting me with her. I know that wasn't easy. He drove home with Sophie sleeping in the passenger seat and thoughts that wouldn't settle into coherent patterns. The evening had shifted something, had made Clara real in a way she hadn't been before. Not just an ally or employer, but someone who played piano beautifully and ordered pizza because she couldn't cook and wanted friendship badly enough to risk rejection. That made everything more complicated. The board meeting arrived like an approaching storm, inevitable and potentially destructive. Adam wore his borrowed suit again. He really needed to buy his own, but that felt like tempting fate, and met Clara in the lobby of Morgan Industries headquarters. She looked armored in a charcoal suit and heels, her CEO mask firmly in place. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." The boardroom was on the 25th floor, dominated by a table that could seat 20 and probably cost more than Adam's truck. Half the seats were filled with men and women in expensive suits, faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. Adam recognized a few from his first meeting, including the silver-haired executive who'd scoffed at his suggestions. Claire called the meeting to order with crisp efficiency, laying out the proposed changes to worker contracts with the kind of detailed preparation that came from knowing her audience would fight every point. Adam listened, impressed despite himself by how she'd anticipated objections and armed herself with data. When she finished, the silver-haired executive, Richard Holbrook, Adam remembered, leaned back in his chair with theatrical skepticism. "This is financial suicide," he said flatly. "You want to tie our hands with long-term contracts, share profits with workers who had nothing to do with generating them, and open our books to people with no business education. The shareholders will revolt." "The shareholders," Clara replied coolly, "will see that we're building a sustainable model instead of extracting maximum value until there's nothing left to extract. Webb's approach nearly destroyed this company. I'm proposing we try something different." Different is a nice word for naive. Holbrook looked around the table, gathering support. "We've survived decades by being pragmatic, by making hard choices that prioritize the company's health over individual comfort. What you're proposing is sentimentality masquerading as business strategy." Adam felt anger rise in his chest but kept his expression neutral. Claire caught his eye and gave the smallest nod, his cue. "Mr. Holbrook," Adam said, and the room's attention swiveled to him. "I'm curious about something. How many of the workers laid off during Webb's restructuring have you actually spoken with?" Holbrook blinked, clearly not expecting to be questioned. "I don't see how that's relevant." "It's entirely relevant, because you're talking about people like they're abstract figures in a spreadsheet, but they're real. They have families, mortgages, kids who need shoes and groceries, and a future that doesn't involve watching their parents struggle." Adam kept his voice level, conversational. "I was one of those people. I know exactly what your pragmatic choices cost. And now you're here, employed again, with a generous salary." Holbrook's smile was thin. "Seems like the system worked." "I'm here because Clara pulled me from a wrecked car and then asked for my help stopping a man who tried to murder her. That's not the system working. That's luck and coincidence." Adam leaned forward. "But the 50 people we're rehiring in Millridge? That's a choice. Your choice. You can decide that people matter, that communities matter, that being profitable doesn't require leaving wreckage in your wake. Or you can keep doing what you've always done and wonder why eventually there's no one left who trusts you enough to work for you." The silence that followed felt charged, electric. Adam saw Clara watching him with something that might have been pride, saw other board members shifting uncomfortably, saw Holbrook's face redden with suppressed anger. "Passionate speech," Holbrook said finally, "but passion doesn't pay dividends." "Neither does corruption," Clara interjected smoothly, "which is what we got with Webb's approach. So perhaps we try something new. Unless you'd prefer I call for a vote on your position as well?" It was a power play, beautifully executed. Holbrook subsided and Clara moved the conversation forward, outlining implementation timelines and success metrics. By the meeting's end, they had tentative approval for a 6-month trial of the new contract structure. Outside the boardroom, Clara allowed herself a small smile. "That was effective. I might have been too aggressive. You were perfect." Holbrook needed to understand that opposition comes with consequences. She checked her watch. "I have another meeting in 10 minutes, but I wanted to thank you for backing me in there." "That's what partners do." Something flickered in her expression, too quick to identify. "Partners. Yes, I suppose we are." The next few weeks blurred together in a rush of activity. The Mill Ridge plant opened for its first shift in 9 months, 50 people returning to work with cautious optimism. Adam was there for the ribbon cutting, standing beside Clara as cameras flashed and reporters asked questions about the company's new direction. "This is just the beginning," Clara told them. "Morgan Industries is committed to being a different kind of corporation, one that measures success not just in profit, but in the well-being of our workers and communities." It sounded like PR, and maybe it was, but Adam saw the sincerity in her eyes when she said it. She meant every word, even if believing it required a leap of faith from everyone involved. He spent the following weeks at the plant, working alongside the floor manager to ensure the transition went smoothly. People had questions, concerns, skepticism that couldn't be addressed with platitudes. So Adam listened, carried messages back to Clara, and slowly built bridges between the workforce and management. It wasn't perfect. There were complaints about equipment that needed replacing, about processes that could be more efficient, about wages that still weren't quite high enough. But people were working, earning, providing for their families. That was something real. Sophie noticed the change in her father, the way he came home tired but satisfied instead of tired and defeated. "You're happier now," she observed one evening over dinner. "I am," Adam admitted. "Does that surprise you?" "A little. You were sad for a long time after Mom died." She said it simply, without judgment. "I thought maybe you forgot how to be happy." The observation cut deeper than she probably intended. Adam set down his fork and looked at his daughter, seeing the wisdom in her young face that came from witnessing too much loss too soon. "I didn't forget. I just misplaced it for a while. But I'm finding it again." "Because of Ms. Morgan?" "Because of a lot of things. The work. Knowing I'm helping people. And yeah, Clara's been part of that." He hesitated, then decided honesty mattered. "She's become a good friend." "Do you like her?" "Of course I like her." "No, I mean like her, the way you liked Mom." Adam felt his chest tighten. Sophie was too perceptive, had noticed something he'd been deliberately not examining. "It's complicated, kiddo." That's what adults say when they don't want to explain. Sophie pushed her vegetables around her plate. "Emma's mom has a boyfriend now. Emma says it's weird at first, but then it's okay." "Is that your way of saying it would be okay if I dated someone?" Sophie shrugged with studied casualness. "I just want you to be happy. Mom would want that too." Tears pricked at Adam's eyes, sudden and unexpected. His daughter, this small, fierce person who'd lost her mother too young, was giving him permission to move forward, to stop being frozen in grief and fear. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." They finished dinner and Adam helped with homework, but Sophie's question lingered in his mind. Did he like Clara that way? He'd been so focused on keeping their relationship professional, on maintaining boundaries, that he hadn't let himself consider other possibilities. But the truth was there, unavoidable once he looked at it directly. Somewhere between the storm and the boardroom battles, between watching her play piano and seeing her fight for what was right, he developed feelings that had nothing to do with gratitude or professional respect. He liked her. Maybe more than liked her. The realization was terrifying. A week later, Marcus Webb's trial began. Adam had been dreading it, had hoped somehow he wouldn't need to testify, but the prosecution called him on the second day. He sat in the witness box with his palms sweating, very aware of Webb watching from the defense table with cold calculation. The prosecutor walked him through that night in the storm, finding Clara, pulling her from the wreck, keeping her alive until morning. Then through the investigation that followed, the device planted at the gala, the confrontation at Brennan's garage. Webb's lawyer tried to paint Adam as a glory seeker, someone looking for reward money and fame. But Adam kept his answers simple, factual, impossible to twist into something they weren't. "Did Miss Morgan offer you compensation before you agreed to help her?" the defense attorney asked. "No." "Did she promise you a job?" "Not until after Webb was arrested." "But you received both. $500,000 and a position at her company. Quite convenient." "I received compensation because I helped stop a murder and expose fraud. The job came later because Clara wanted someone who understood what her decisions cost people." Adam met the lawyer's eyes steadily. If you're suggesting I helped her for money, you're wrong. I helped her because it was the right thing to do. The lawyer tried several more angles, but Adam didn't budge. When he was finally dismissed, he caught Clara's eye in the gallery and saw her mouth, "Thank you." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Kyle Brennan testified about tampering with Clara's car, about the payment from Webb, about being told it needed to look like an accident. Financial experts walked the jury through Webb's embezzlement, the shell companies and offshore accounts. And Clara herself spent 2 days on the stand, calm and precise, laying out every detail of the corruption she'd uncovered. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon, guilty on all counts. Webb's face remained impassive as the jury foreman read each charge, but Adam saw his hands tighten on the defense table. Decades in prison, most likely. A life of privilege and power reduced to a cell and regret. Outside the courthouse, Clara stood before a crowd of reporters and made a brief statement. Justice has been served today, but the real work is just beginning. Morgan Industries will spend years rebuilding trust with the communities we damaged. That's my focus now, and I won't rest until we've made things right. She fielded a few questions, then slipped away with Reeves and her security team. Adam tried to leave separately, but reporters recognized him and swarmed. "Mr. Blake, how does it feel to see Webb convicted? Are you and Clara Morgan in a relationship? Will you continue working for Morgan Industries?" That second question caught him off guard, and his hesitation was apparently answer enough because cameras flashed, and he knew that moment of uncertainty would be dissected in tomorrow's news. He pushed through without commenting and made it to his truck, sitting in the parking garage for several minutes while his heart rate settled. The trial was over. Webb was convicted. Everything they'd fought for had been achieved. So why did he feel so unsettled? His phone rang. Clara calling from the burner phone they still occasionally used out of habit. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just processing. I know the feeling. Listen, I'm going away for a few days. My lawyer says I should disappear until the media frenzy dies down. But when I get back, I'd like to talk, really talk, about everything." Adam's pulse quickened. "Everything?" "Everything." She paused. "I'll call you when I'm back in town. Take care of yourself, Adam." The line went dead, leaving him with more questions than answers. Clara was gone for a week. In her absence, Adam threw himself into work at the Millridge plant, helping troubleshoot issues and continuing to build relationships with the workforce. The company had hired 30 more people, ahead of schedule, and there was talk of expanding operations to a second shift. Sophie finished 3rd grade with excellent marks, and Adam treated her to the new shoes she'd been wanting and dinner at her favorite restaurant. They talked about summer plans, about maybe taking a trip to the beach, about normal things that felt precious precisely because they were ordinary. On a Saturday morning in late May, Clara called. "I'm back. Can we meet? That park on Riverside, same place as before?" Adam agreed, nervous in a way he hadn't been since high school. He dropped Sophie at his mother-in-law's house. Margaret raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions, and drove to the park with his stomach in knots. Clara was already there, sitting on their bench overlooking the river. She wore jeans and a simple shirt, her hair pulled back, and when she saw him, she smiled with genuine warmth. "Hey," she said. "Hey yourself." Adam sat beside her, maintaining careful distance. "How was your escape from reality?" "Necessary. I spent a week at my father's cabin in the mountains. No phone service, just me and too much time to think." She turned to face him. "I figured some things out." "Yeah?" "I've spent 5 years running my father's company, trying to live up to his legacy, believing that was enough. That if I could just be good at business, everything else would fall into place." She looked out at the river. "But you taught me something. Actually living, making choices that matter, connecting with people, being vulnerable. That's harder and more important than any quarterly report." "I didn't teach you that. You figured it out yourself." "Maybe, but you showed me what it looked like." Clara took a breath. "I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations, promoting my COO to CEO while I transition to board chair. It means less power, but more time to actually do the work that matters. Community rebuilding, ethical oversight, the things I care about." "That's a big change." "It is. And it's terrifying. But I can't keep living the life my father chose for me. I need to figure out what Clara Morgan wants, separate from the company. She paused. Part of that is admitting something I've been avoiding for months. Adam's heart hammered. What's that? That I have feelings for you. Real, complicated, inconvenient feelings that have nothing to do with gratitude or professional respect. She looked at him directly. I understand if you don't feel the same way. I understand if the power dynamic makes this impossible, or if you're not ready, or if I've completely misread everything. But I needed to be honest, because you've always been honest with me. For a long moment, Adam couldn't speak. All the careful distance he'd maintained, all the barriers he'd built against exactly this possibility, crumbled in the face of her naked vulnerability. You didn't misread anything, he said finally. I've been trying not to feel this for weeks because it seemed complicated and risky and like asking for trouble. But Sophie asked me if I liked you, and I couldn't lie to her. What did you tell her? That it's complicated, which was true then. He reached out, taking Claire's hand carefully, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. But maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe two people who've been through hell together are allowed to try for something good. Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to do this. I haven't been in a relationship since college. I work too much. I'm difficult. My life is public in ways that will affect you and Sophie. And I'm a single dad with a terrible wardrobe and baggage that could fill a warehouse, Adam interrupted. We're both disasters. Maybe that's okay. She laughed, the sound breaking tension. This is either the best idea we've ever had, or the worst. Only one way to find out. Adam leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. Their kiss was tentative at first, testing, then deeper as months of suppressed feeling found expression. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara was smiling in a way he'd never seen before. Unguarded, genuinely happy. So what happens now? She asked. Now we figure it out as we go. Take things slow, see how Sophie adjusts, be honest when things get hard. Adam squeezed her hand. And maybe you come to dinner at my place sometime. Fair warning, I'm a better cook than you, but that's not saying much. I'd like that. Clara stood, pulling him up with her. I'd like all of that. The slow, the honest, the figuring it out together. They walked along the river path, hands linked, talking about logistics and concerns and hopes, with the kind of careful optimism that came from having survived the worst and choosing to believe in better. It wasn't a fairy tale ending because real life didn't work that way. There would be challenges ahead, complications from their past, moments of doubt. But as spring sunshine filtered through new leaves and the river flowed steady beside them, Adam felt something settle into place that had been missing for years. Not just hope, not just possibility, peace. The summer that followed was gentle in ways Adam hadn't expected. He and Clara moved cautiously, dating in the traditional sense. Dinners, movies, long walks where they talked about everything except work. Sophie was initially skeptical, then curious, then gradually accepting as she saw her father happy in a way he hadn't been since before her mother died. She's pretty good at board games, Sophie admitted after Clara spent an evening playing Sorry with them, even if she does lose a lot. I'll tell her you approve, Adam said, amused. I didn't say I approve. Said she's okay at board games. There's a difference. But her small smile gave her away, and Adam knew they'd be fine. The Millridge plant continued to grow, adding a second shift and then discussions of a third. People who'd left town started returning, drawn by steady work and the knowledge that this time felt different. Adam spent less time on site as other managers took over day-to-day operations, focusing instead on larger strategic questions about ethical business practices and community investment. Marcus Webb was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison. The news came through one afternoon while Adam was at the office, and he felt nothing but distant satisfaction. Webb had become irrelevant, a cautionary tale rather than an active threat, and Adam found he could think about that night in the storm without the tightness in his chest that used to accompany the memory. On a Saturday in late August, Clara invited Adam and Sophie to her house for what she mysteriously called a small celebration. They arrived to find the backyard transformed with lights strung through trees and a table set for dinner. What's the occasion? Adam asked. The official reopening of Millridge, Clara said. Full capacity, 3 shifts, 240 jobs. We did it. Sophie immediately ran to explore the garden, leaving the adults alone. Adam pulled Clara close, kissing her with the easy familiarity they'd developed over months of learning each other. We did do it, he agreed, though you did most of the heavy lifting. Partnership means we both contributed what we could. She rested her head against his shoulder. I have something else to tell you. The board approved my new initiative, Community Investment Funds. 10% of annual profits dedicated to rebuilding infrastructure in towns affected by our past decisions. Schools, libraries, job training programs. That's incredible. It's what should have been done from the start. Better late than never. She pulled back to look at him. And I want you to run it, if you're interested. Adam felt the weight of that offer, the trust it represented. That's a lot of responsibility. You've never shied away from responsibility. Besides, who better to understand what communities need than someone who lived through losing everything? I didn't lose everything. I had Sophie. You know what I mean. He did. And the opportunity to help rebuild not just Millridge but other towns, to take the lessons they'd learned and scale them, was compelling in ways he hadn't anticipated. Can I think about it? Of course, no pressure, whatever you decide. They were interrupted by Sophie running back, breathless with excitement. Clara, there's a treehouse. Can I go in it? It's pretty old and probably not safe, Clara started, but then she saw Sophie's face and softened. But if your dad says it's okay, we can check it out together. Adam watched them walk toward the old oak at the back of the property, Clara listening intently to Sophie's chatter, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of his life. For so long he'd thought of himself as surviving, as making the best of terrible circumstances, as protecting Sophie from a world that seemed designed to hurt them. But this, watching his daughter laugh with a woman who'd become integral to both their lives, standing in a garden lit by summer evening light, knowing that the work he did mattered and would continue to matter, this wasn't survival. This was living. 6 months later, on a cold January evening, Adam stood in his new apartment, larger than the cabin, in a better neighborhood, with a second bedroom so Sophie finally had her own space, and reflected on how drastically his life had changed in just over a year. The compensation Clara had promised sat mostly untouched in an investment account, earmarked for Sophie's future. His salary was more than enough to cover their expenses and then some. The job running community investment was challenging and meaningful, exactly the kind of work he'd never imagined doing but turned out to be good at. And Clara was due to arrive in 30 minutes for a dinner Adam had spent all afternoon preparing. Sophie was at his mother-in-law's for the weekend, part of their regular arrangement that gave Adam and Clara time alone while also ensuring Sophie maintained strong connections with her grandmother. It was a system that worked for everyone involved. When Clara arrived, she kissed him hello and presented a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Adam's weekly grocery budget. They cooked together, moving around the kitchen with comfortable coordination, and ate while talking about their days, about the upcoming board meeting, about Sophie's request for piano lessons that Clara had offered to provide. After dinner, they moved to the couch and Clara curled against him in a way that still felt miraculous every time it happened. I have something to show you, she said, pulling out her phone. This came today. It was a news article, headline reading, Former CEO's Ethical Revolution Transforms Morgan Industries. The piece detailed the changes Clara had implemented, the communities being reinvested in, the worker satisfaction scores that had climbed steadily. There was a quote from Adam about the importance of treating employees as partners, and a photo of the Millridge plant in full operation. We're becoming a model, Clara said quietly. Other companies are watching, asking how we did it, whether it's sustainable long-term. Is it sustainable? So far. Profits are down slightly, but not catastrophically. Employee retention is up. We're building something that might actually last. She looked up at him. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but I would have been alone, and it would have been harder, and I might have given up when the board fought back. She took his hand. You gave me courage when I needed it most. That night in the storm, you saved my life. But in all the time since, you've been saving me in smaller ways every day, teaching me what matters, showing me how to be better. Adam felt his throat tighten. You did the same for me. I was drowning before you came along. Not just financially, but in here. He touched his chest. I'd forgotten how to hope. You reminded me. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from deep understanding, and Adam thought about trajectories and choices, and the strange ways lives could intersect and change everything. If he hadn't walked past that wrecked car, if he'd kept going, minded his own business, stayed invisible. If Clara hadn't been driving that night, hadn't been running from men who wanted her dead, hadn't crashed on a road where someone would find her. The what-ifs could drive you crazy if you let them. But Adam had learned to focus on what was rather than what might have been. I love you, he said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken those words, and they hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Claire's eyes widened, then filled with tears. I love you too. I've wanted to say it for months, but I was afraid of what? That you'd think it was too fast, that I was confusing gratitude with feeling, that I'd somehow ruin this by pushing too hard. Adam kissed her softly. It's not too fast. It's exactly right. He paused, gathering courage for what he wanted to say next. I don't know what the future looks like, but I want you in it. However that works, whatever shape it takes. You and me and Sophie figuring it out together. Like a family? Claire's voice was tentative, hopeful. Yeah, like a family. She kissed him then, deep and long. And when they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. That night, lying in bed with Clara asleep beside him, Adam stared at the ceiling and thought about the past year, about a storm that had brought them together, about danger and investigation and standing up to powerful men who thought they were untouchable, about rebuilding communities and learning to trust again and finding love in the ruins of everything he'd lost. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, setbacks, complications neither of them had anticipated. The media still occasionally resurfaced their story, and Adam had learned to tolerate the attention even if he never enjoyed it. Sophie was still adjusting to having Clara in their lives, though she was warming more every day. And the work of transforming Morgan Industries was far from complete. But as Clara shifted in her sleep, moving closer instinctively, Adam felt grateful for every difficult step that had led to this moment. Because sometimes the person you rescue in a snowstorm doesn't just survive. Sometimes they show you the way home. Not to a place, but to a version of yourself you'd forgotten could exist. To courage instead of fear. To purpose instead of mere survival. To love instead of loneliness. And on this quiet winter night, in an apartment that finally felt like home, Adam Blake allowed himself to believe in the future again. Not a perfect future, not one without challenges, but one built on honesty and partnership and the hard-won knowledge that decent people could still change the world if they refused to give up. Spring would come again soon, bringing new growth and possibilities. But for now, this was enough. This moment of peace after the storm, this calm after chaos. This was everything.